everybody. Thank you so much, lurking team. I appreciate all of the lurkers assembling in the chat. Thank you so much. Also, hello everybody. I see Twitch has done a new thing where now when you contribute magic to the community, it tells you. It tells everybody. It tells everybody all of the things. I feel like we're gonna have a lot of those messages in the chat. Oh, right, do you like it, Plastic Ape? Oh, thank you. I found this on Amazon and I was like, yo. I was looking for cheap shirts and then I found this and I was like, I'm getting it. It's cool. Yeah, I found out that I'm actually really into contrast items. That's my thing. And I like the collar. I like that it's like a slightly more androgynous look. Especially if I like button it up, then it becomes like real androgynous. I like it. Hi Iris! How's everybody doing today? It's so summery. Like I've been outside. I definitely have not left this house in a long time and I should probably go outside at some point. There's no like nice outside places to go to nearby. There's no like parks like nearby here. Oh well. I guess there's some green grass area. Old Hawaiians. Yeah, I guess for some reason I'm like really into vintage 90s clothes. Like, I don't know. I'm also into vintage like 50s and older, but for some reason I'm like, lol, let's bring back. I have no idea what's going on, but like, it turns out I like it. So it's not day anymore. Have a good evening. Do I have a balcony? No. Just lots of windows. Lots of windows that make it a little hot. How many viewers does book club usually get? Usually like 15 to 20. On a good day? That I can get into the parking lot. They've reclosed a lot of them. Oh, well. You know, as they probably should. Up here, as they probably should. Have fun at work. Thank you, little sushi roll. Oh, you guys are really dedicated to this. Honestly, it's super like it's super wholesome to me to see everybody like, let's do it. I just think it's like the cutest thing. Today we're going to be reading The Picture of Dorian Gray, chapter 14, and I will try to catch everybody up on where we were at. But just briefly, you know, let's have a little bit of a chat as I turn on my fan because it's so freaking hot in here. It's super hot. It's never until Oh, good. Thank you for the 100 bits and letting the Bit Pony ride, Plastic Ape. Some of you might have noticed, and I will restate this again, but I have switched from Streamlabs to Stream Elements for the donation page, specifically because I discovered Streamlabs does this thing where if you accidentally click on a GIF while you're donating, it can sign you up for a year's worth of Streamlabs Prime and will refuse to if you ask for a refund, they will refuse. So it seemed really scammy, and I found out that this had happened to a lot of people, so I immediately swapped everything over to Stream Elements. That is donation wise, and I'm still fixing everything and getting it to like look actually good, but that's why the donation page looks different, and that's why some of the alerts might look a little bit off for a little bit until I figure out how to properly use this thing. But just so you know, in case you were concerned, that is a thing. Also, just if you follow a streamer who does use Streamlabs, keep that in mind and be careful not to click on any of the GIFs. Be careful not to click on any of the GIFs. We don't need anybody stealing money that you are not intending to give. So, disappointing, but hey! That's where we're at, and we're moving on. So, the last time we've read The Picture of Dorian Gray, does everybody remember what happened? I'm curious if people remember. It was a little bit ago, and it was very sad for me because my favorite character is now gone from the story. The only good character is now gone forever. Because Dorian murdered him. That's where we left off last time. For those who don't know as much about the Picture of Dorian Gray, what is currently happening in the story is that a time lapse has just occurred. So we started off the story initially with Dorian as a young, uncorrupted, pure youth who had his portrait painted. And then he starts being corrupted by this guy who's like basically super cynical and just talks about bad. He just like says stuff for fun and talks about how like people are awful, women are awful, society's awful, charity's bad, etc. All this kind of stuff. Hey, thank you, Exile! Yeah, you know, and so Dorian starts absorbing all of this, and the most important message that he absorbs is that Dorian is told that people only like him for his youth, and if his youth fades, then his life is going to be over. And Dorian, like, realizes for the first time that he's beautiful and that his looks can go away. Oh! Hey! I'll need to reposition that. Akira Okami! Hey! Akira Okami, thank you for tipping $4.20 to give Kirby the munchies. And you pointed out that unlike Streamlabs, it lets you choose not to use PayPal. Nice. Oh, nice! Thank you! That means that that's like my first... Streamlabs, when I set it up, they were like, wait until you have your very first donation! And I was like, yup. And they were like, we won't let you set up the things to get the money out of this until after you have money in it. And I was like, sure, yeah, that's fine. It was all very strange. Also, for those of you who were here last time and heard, and were comparing the chatting stats, I looked into that. Because I didn't start using Stream Elements until recently, the chatting stats are not accurate. So the chatting stats start like a couple of months ago and don't account for the whole 3 years. So just keep that in mind. Basically, if you want to get to the #1 chat position, now is the time to go, because it's anybody's ballgame. But yeah, so Dorian fell in love with a girl named Sybil Vane, and basically was infatuated with her and her acting ability and how pretty she was and how perfect they were as a couple. And then he brings his friends, he proposes marriage to her and then brings his friends to the theater to watch her play. She does a terrible job. Dorian is humiliated, and then after the theater, after the show, he goes to her and basically just like demolishes her. He's like, you're awful, you're horrible, don't even touch me, I want nothing to do with you, I can't believe you suck so bad, why would you do this to me, can you imagine how much I suffered while you embarrassed me in front of my friends? And then he leaves, and so Sybil Vane... Oh, happy birthday to your grandma! Happy birthday to your grandma! But yeah, and so Sybil Vane is later found dead that night, directly because of Dorian's actions, and when he goes home, he finds out that the portrait that he has been given by his painter friend has changed to show... Hey, thanks, Plastic Ape. The portrait has changed to show cruelty in his face after treating Sybil Vane so cruelly. So after discovering this about the portrait, he's kind of like very distraught at first and almost tries to be a good person just so that the portrait will look beautiful. But then after a while, he just realizes that this means that he can do whatever he wants and it's never going to have any consequences on his face because he's not going to age or look like a mean person. So then I believe that's when we had the time lapse. He's kind of fallen, I think like 7 or 8 years pass. He's fallen out of his friendship with Basil the painter. And Basil comes to see him after a long time and basically is like, hey, I'm about to leave town, but I had to come see you because I've been hearing the craziest stuff about you and how awful you are. And I don't want to believe any of it's true because we were so close back then, and I know you so well, and you're just not like that. So like, what's going on? Why is everybody talking about how horrible you are? And Dorian kind of gets like pretty mad, and he doesn't like confirm or deny anything. And then he's like, hey, you know what if I take you upstairs to show you my secret? And Basil's like, okay, sure. So they go upstairs to see the portrait. Basil sees that the portrait is horrible and disgusting and like ghoulish now with all of Dorian's bad things that he's been doing. And Dorian decides to murder him. Just stabs him right there. Leaves the room, locks the door, like goes outside the window, sees a policeman patrolling, just chilling. Leaves the room, locks the door behind him, doesn't even do anything with the dead body, and is just like, there we go, now my secret's safe. And like, doesn't even react to the fact that he literally killed a man. Also, there was a super long chapter that talked about like basically all of the objects that Dorian has been filling his time with instead of anything meaningful. He's basically just been collecting lots of luxurious and beautiful things because he thinks beauty is the only thing that matters, even as he's running through all of his societal acquaintances and making enemies of people. So yeah, that's where we left. We left with Dorian basically talking to his butler and like setting up an alibi for himself where he pretends like he only just got home, even though he's been home for several hours, enough hours to kill Basil. So he pretends he only just got home and purposefully wakes up his butler to make it look like he just got home. And the butler's like, sure, okay, whatever. And that is where we left. So, with that being said, we will begin with chapter 14. Now, chapter 14, if you have exclamation point PDF, will give you a PDF that you can follow along with if you need it. And we are reading the unabridged version of Dorian Gray, so if you have your own book, then the chapters might not fully align, but chapter 14 is the chapter that begins at 9 o'clock the next morning. His servant came in. So that being said, we shall start. At 9 o'clock the next morning, his servant came in with a cup of chocolate on a tray and opened the shutters. Dorian was sleeping quite peacefully, lying on his right side with one hand underneath his cheek. He looked like a boy who had been tired out with play or study. The man had to touch him twice on the shoulder before he woke, and as he opened his eyes, a faint smile passed across his lips, as though he had been lost in some delightful dream. Yet he had not dreamed at all. His night had been untroubled by any images of pleasure or of pain. But youth smiles without any reason. It is one of its chiefest charms. He turned round and, leaning upon his elbow, began to sip his chocolate. The mellow November sun came streaming into the room. The sky was bright, and there was a genial warmth in the air. It was almost like a morning in May. Gradually the events of the preceding night crept with silent, blood-stained feet into his brain, and reconstructed themselves there with terrible distinctness. He winced at the memory of all that he had suffered, and for a moment the same curious feeling of loathing for Basil Hallward that had made him kill him as he sat in the chair came back to him, and he grew cold with passion. The dead man was still sitting there too, and in the sunlight now. How horrible that was! Such hideous things were for the darkness, not for the day. He felt that if he brooded on what he had gone through, he would sicken or grow mad. There were sins whose fascination was more in the memory than in the doing of them, strange triumphs that gratified the pride more than the passions, and gave to the intellect a quickened sense of joy greater than any joy they brought or could ever bring to the senses. But this was not one of them. It was a thing to be driven out of the mind, to be drugged with poppies, to be strangled lest it might strangle one itself. When the half-hour struck, he passed his hand across his forehead, and then got up hastily and dressed himself with even more than his usual care, giving a good deal of attention to the choice of his necktie and scarf pin, and changing his rings more than once. He spent a long time also over breakfast, tasting the various dishes, talking to his valet about some new liveries that he was thinking of getting made for the servants at Selby, and going through his correspondence. At some of the letters he smiled. 3 of them bored him. One he read several times over, and then tore up with a slight look of annoyance in his face. "That awful thing, a woman's memory," as Lord Henry had once said. After he had drunk his cup of black coffee, he wiped his lips slowly with a napkin, motioned to his servant to wait, and going over to the table, sat down and wrote 2 letters. One he put in his pocket, the other he handed to the valet. "Take this round to 152 Hertford Street, Francis, and if Mr. Campbell is out of town, get his address." As soon as he was alone, he lit a cigarette and began sketching upon a piece of paper, drawing first flowers and bits of architecture, and then human faces. Suddenly he remarked that every face that he drew seemed to have a fantastic likeness to Basil Hallward. He frowned, and getting up, went over to the bookcase and took out a volume at hazard. He was determined that he would not think about what had happened until it became absolutely necessary that he should do so. When he had stretched himself on the sofa, he looked at the title page of the book. It was Gautier's Emo et Camille, Charpentier's Japanese paper edition, with the Jacques Mart etching. The binding was of citron green leather, with a design of gilt trellis work and dotted pomegranates. It had been given to him by Adrian Singleton. As he turned over the pages, his eye fell on the poem about the hand of Lacenaire, the cold, yellow hand, du supplice encore mal lavé, with its downy red hairs and its doigts de faune. He glanced at his own white tapered fingers, shuddering slightly in spite of himself, and passed on till he came to those lovely stanzas upon Venice. Sur une gamme chromatique, le sein de perles ruisselant, la Venus de la Adriatique, sort de le sang courbe rose et blanc. Les dames sur l'azur des ondes, suivant la phrase au pur contour, s'enflant comme des gorges rondes que soulèvent un soupir d'amour. Les cuivres abordés et me dépose, jetant son amarre au pilier devant une façade rose sur le marbre d'un escalier. I apologize for anybody who understands that language. How exquisite they were! As one read them, one seemed to be floating down the green waterways of the pink and pearl city, seated in a black gondola with silver prow and trailing curtains. The mere lines looked to him like those straight lines of turquoise blue that follow one as one pushes out to the Lido. The sudden flashes of color reminded him of the gleam of the opal and iris-throated birds that flutter round the tall honeycombed campanile, or stalk, with such stately grace, through the dim, dust-stained arcades. Leaning back with half-closed eyes, he kept saying over and over to himself, "Devant une façade rose, sur le marbre d'un escalier." The whole of Venice was in those 2 lines. He remembered the autumn that he had passed there, and what a wonderful love that had stirred him to mad, delightful follies. There was romance in every place, but Venice, like Oxford, had kept the background for romance, and to the true romantic, background was everything. Or almost everything. Basil had been with him part of the time, and had gone wild over Tintoret. Oh, poor Basil! What a horrible way for a man to die! He sighed, and took up the volume again, and tried to forget. He read of the swallows that fly in and out of the little cafe at Smyrna, where the Hadjis sit counting their amber beads, and the turbaned merchants smoke their long tasseled pipes and talk gravely to each other. He read of the obelisk in the Place de la Concorde, that weeps tears of granite in its lonely, sunless exile, and longs to be back by the hot lotus-covered Nile, where there are sphinxes and rose-red ibises, and white vultures with gilded claws, and crocodiles with small barrel eyes that crawl over the green, steaming mud. He began to brood over those verses which, drawing music from kiss-stained marble, tell of that curious statue that Gautier compares to a contralto voice, the Monstre Charmant, that couches in the porphyry room of the Louvre. But after a time the book fell from his hand. He grew nervous, and a horrible fit of terror came over him. What if Alan Campbell should be out of England? Days would elapse before he could come back. Perhaps he might refuse to come. What could he do then? Every moment was of vital importance. They had been great friends once, 5 years before. Almost inseparable indeed. Then the intimacy had come suddenly to an end. When they met in society now, it was only Dorian Gray who smiled. Alan Campbell never did. He was an extremely clever young man, though he had no real appreciation of the visible arts, and whatever little sense of the beauty of poetry he possessed, he had gained entirely from Dorian. His dominant intellectual passion was for science. At Cambridge he had spent a great deal of his time working in the laboratory, and had taken a good class in the natural science tripos of his year. Indeed, he was still devoted to the study of chemistry, and had a laboratory of his own, in which he used to shut himself up all day long, greatly to the annoyance of his mother, who had set her heart on his standing for Parliament, and had a vague idea that a chemist was a person who made up prescriptions. He was an excellent musician, however, as well, and played both the violin and the piano better than most amateurs. In fact, it was music that had first brought him and Dorian Gray together. Music, and that indefinable attraction that Dorian seemed to be able to exercise whenever he wished, and indeed exercised often without being conscious of it. They had met at Lady Berkshire's the night that Rubinstein played there, and after that used to be always seen together at the opera, and wherever good music was going on. For 18 months their intimacy lasted. Campbell was always either at Selby Royal or in Grosvenor Square. To him, as to many others, Dorian Gray was the type of everything that was wonderful and fascinating in life. Whether or not a quarrel had taken place between them, no one ever knew. But suddenly people remarked that they scarcely spoke when they met, and that Campbell always seemed to go away early from any party at which Dorian Gray was present. He had changed too, was strangely melancholy at times, appeared almost to dislike hearing music, and would never himself play, giving as his excuse when he was called upon that he was so absorbed in science that he had no time left in which to practice. And this was certainly true. Every day he seemed to become more interested in biology, and his name appeared once or twice in some of the scientific reviews in connection with certain curious experiments. This was the man Dorian Gray was waiting for. Every second he kept glancing at the clock. As the minutes went by he became horribly agitated. At last he got up and began to pace up and down the room, looking like a beautiful caged thing. He took long, stealthy strides. His hands were curiously cold. The suspense became unbearable. Time seemed to him to be crawling with feet of lead, while he, by monstrous winds, was being swept towards the jagged edge of some black cleft of precipice. He knew what was waiting for him there, saw it indeed, and, shuddering, crushed with dank hands his burning lids as though he would have robbed the very brain of sight and driven the eyeballs back into their cave. It was useless. The brain had its own food on which it battened, and the imagination, made grotesque by terror, twisted and distorted as a living thing by pain, danced like some foul puppet on a stand, and grinned through moving masks. Then, suddenly, time stopped for him. Yes, that blind, slow-breathing thing crawled no more, and horrible thoughts, time being dead, raced nimbly on in front, and dragged a hideous future from its grave, and showed it to him. He stared at it. Its very horror made him stone. At last the door opened, and his servant entered. He turned glazed eyes upon him. "Mr. Campbell, sir," said the man. A sigh of relief broke from his parched lips, and the color came back into his cheeks. "Ask him to come in at once, Francis." He felt that he was himself again. His mood of cowardice had passed away. The man bowed and retired. In a few moments Alan Campbell walked in, looking very stern and rather pale, his pallor being intensified by his coal-black hair and dark eyebrows. "Alan! This is kind of you. I thank you for coming." "I had intended never to enter your house again, Gray, but you said it was a matter of life and death." His voice was hard and cold. He spoke with slow deliberation. There was a look of contempt in the steady, searching gaze that he turned on Dorian. He kept his hands in the pockets of his astrakhan coat, and seemed not to have noticed the gesture with which he had been greeted. "Yes, it is a matter of life and death, Alan, and to more than one person. Sit down." Campbell took a chair by the table, and Dorian sat opposite to him. The two men's eyes met. In Dorian's there was infinite pity. He knew that what he was going to do was dreadful. After a strained moment of silence, he leaned across and said, very quietly, but watching the effect of each word upon the face of him he had sent for, "Alan, in a locked room at the top of this house, a room to which nobody but myself has access, A dead man is seated at a table. He has been dead 10 hours now. Don't stir, and don't look at me like that. Who the man is, why he died, how he died, are matters that do not concern you. What you have to do is this. Stop, Gray. I don't want to know anything further. Whether what you have told me is true or not true doesn't concern me. I entirely decline to be mixed up in your life. Keep your horrible secrets to yourself. They don't interest me anymore. Alan, they will have to interest you. This one will have to interest you. I'm awfully sorry for you, Alan, but I can't help myself. You are the one man who is able to save me. I am forced to bring you into the matter. I have no option. Alan, you are scientific. You know about chemistry and things of that kind. You have made experiments. What you have got to do is to destroy the thing that is upstairs, to destroy it so that not a vestige of it will be left. Nobody saw this person come into the house. Indeed, at the present moment he's supposed to be in Paris. He will not be missed for months. When he is missed, there must be no trace of him found here. You, Alan, you must change him, and everything that belongs to him, into a handful of ashes that I may scatter in the air. You're mad, Dorian. I was waiting for you to call me Dorian. You are mad, I tell you. Mad to imagine that I would raise a finger to help you. Mad to make this monstrous confession. I will have nothing to do with this matter, whatever it is. Do you think I am going to peril my reputation for you? What is it to me what devil's work you are up to? It was suicide, Alan. I am glad of that. But who drove him to it? You, I should fancy. Do you still refuse to do this for me? Of course I refuse. I will have absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't care what shame comes on you. You deserve it all. I should not be sorry to see you disgraced, publicly disgraced. How dare you ask me, of all men in the world, to mix myself up in this horror? I should have thought you knew more about people's characters. Your friend Lord Henry Wotton can't have taught you much about psychology, whatever else he has taught you. Nothing will induce me to stir a step to help you. You've come to the wrong man. Go to some of your friends. Don't come to me. Alan, it was murder. I killed him. You don't know what he made me suffer. Whatever my life is, he had more to do with the making or the marring of it than poor Henry has had. He may not have intended it. The result was the same. Murder? Good God, Dorian, is that what you have come to? I shall not inform upon you. It is not my business. Besides, without my stirring in the matter, you are certain to be arrested. Nobody ever commits a crime without doing something stupid. But I will have nothing to do with it. You must have something to do with it. Oh, wait a moment. Listen to me. Only listen, Alan. All I ask of you is to perform a certain scientific experiment. You go to hospitals and dead houses, and the horrors that you do there don't affect you. If in some hideous dissecting room or fetid laboratory you found this man lying on a leaden table with red gutters scooped out in it for the blood to flow through, you would simply look upon him as an admirable subject. You wouldn't turn a hair. You wouldn't believe that you were doing anything wrong. To the contrary, you would probably feel that you were benefiting the human race, or increasing the sum of knowledge in the world, or gratifying intellectual curiosity, or something of that kind. What I want you to do is merely what you have often done before. Indeed, to destroy a body must be far less horrible than what you are accustomed to work at. And remember, it is the only piece of evidence against me. If it is discovered, I am lost. And it is sure to be discovered unless you help me. I have no desire to help you. You forget that. I'm simply indifferent to the whole thing. It has nothing to do with me. Alan, I entreat you. Think of the position that I am in. Just before you came, I almost fainted with terror. You may know terror yourself some day. No, don't think of that. Look at the matter purely from the scientific point of view. You don't inquire where the dead things on which you experiment come from. Don't inquire now. I have told you too much as it is. But I beg of you to do this. We were friends once, Alan. Don't speak about those days, Dorian. They're dead. The dead linger sometimes. The man upstairs will not go away. He's sitting at the table with bowed head and outstretched arms. Alan! Alan! If you don't come to my assistance, I am ruined. Why, they will hang me, Alan. Don't you understand? They will hang me for what I have done. There is no good in prolonging this scene. I absolutely refuse to do anything in the matter. It is insane of you to ask me. You refuse? Yes. I entreat you, Alan. It is useless. The same look of pity came into Dorian Gray's eyes. Then he stretched out his hand, took a piece of paper, and wrote something on it. He read it over twice, folded it carefully, and pushed it across the table. Having done this, he got up and went over to the window. Campbell looked at him in surprise, and then took up the paper and opened it. As he read it, his face became ghastly pale, and he fell back in his chair. A horrible sense of sickness came over him. He felt as if his heart was beating itself to death in some empty hollow. After 2 or 3 minutes of terrible silence, Dorian turned round and came and stood behind him, putting his hand upon his shoulder. "I am so sorry for you, Alan," he murmured, "but you leave me no alternative. I have a letter written already. Here it is. You see the address. If you don't help me, I must send it. If you don't help me, I will send it. You know what the result will be. But you're going to help me. It is impossible for you to refuse now. I tried to spare you. You will do me the justice to admit that. You were stern, harsh, offensive. You treated me as no man has ever dared to treat me. No living man, at any rate. I bore it all. Now it is for me to dictate terms." Campbell buried his face in his hands, and a shudder passed through him. "Yes, it is my turn to dictate terms, Alan. You know what they are. The thing is quite simple. Come, don't work yourself into this fever. The thing has to be done. Face it, and do it." A groan broke from Campbell's lips, and he shivered all over. The ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece seemed to him to be dividing time into separate atoms of agony, each of which was too terrible to be borne. He felt as if an iron ring was being slowly tightened round his forehead, as if the disgrace with which he was threatened had already come upon him. The hand upon his shoulder weighed like a hand of lead. It was intolerable. It seemed to crush him. "Come, Alan, you must decide at once." "I cannot do it," he said mechanically, as though words could alter things. "You must. You have no choice. Don't delay." He hesitated a moment. "Is there a fire in the room upstairs?" "Yes, there's a gas fire with asbestos." "I shall have to go home and get some things from the laboratory." "No, Alan, you must not leave the house. Write out on a sheet of notepaper what you want, and my servant will take a cab and bring the things back to you." Seems like not the brightest plan to involve a servant in this. Campbell scrawled a few lines, blotted them, and addressed an envelope to his assistant. Dorian took the note up and read it carefully. Then he rang the bell and gave it to his valet, with orders to return as soon as possible and to bring the things with him. As the hall door shut, Campbell started nervously, and, having got up from the chair, went over to the chimney-piece. He was shivering with a kind of ague. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of the men spoke. A fly buzzed noisily about the room, and the ticking of the clock was like the beat of a hammer. As the chime struck 1, Campbell turned round, and, looking at Dorian Gray, saw that his eyes were filled with tears. There was something in the purity and refinement of that sad face that seemed to enrage him. "You are infamous, absolutely infamous," he muttered. "Oh, hush, Alan. You have saved my life," said Dorian. "Your life? Good heavens, what a life that is! You have gone from corruption to corruption, and now you've culminated in crime. I'm doing what I am going to do, what you force me to do. It is not of your life that I am thinking." "Ah, Alan," murmured Dorian with a sigh, "I wish you had 1,000th part of the pity for me that I have for you." He turned away as he spoke, and stood looking out at the garden. Campbell made no answer. After about 10 minutes a knock came to the door, and the servant entered, carrying a large mahogany chest of chemicals with a long coil of steel and platinum wire and 2 rather curiously shaped iron clamps. "Shall I leave the things here, sir?" he asked Campbell. "Yes," said Dorian. "And I am afraid, Francis, that I have another errand for you. What is the name of the man at Richmond who supplies Selby with orchids?" "Harden, sir?" "Yes, Harden. You must go down to Richmond at once, see Harden personally, and tell him to send twice as many orchids as I ordered, and to have as few white ones as possible. In fact, I don't want any white ones. It is a lovely day, Francis, and Richmond is a very pretty place. Otherwise I wouldn't bother you about it." "No trouble, sir. At what time shall I be back?" Dorian looked at Campbell. "How long will your experiment take, Alan?" he said in a calm, indifferent voice. The presence of a third person in the room seemed to give him extraordinary courage. Campbell frowned and bit his lip. "It will take about 5 hours," he answered. "It will be time enough, then, if you are back at 7:30, Francis. Or stay, just leave my things out for dressing. You can have the evening to yourself. I'm not dining at home, so I shall not want you." "Thank you, sir," said the man, leaving the room. "Now, Alan, there is not a moment to be lost. How heavy this chest is! I'll take it for you. You bring the other things." He spoke rapidly and in an authoritative manner. Campbell felt dominated by him. They left the room together. When they reached the top landing, Dorian took out the key and turned it in the lock. Then he stopped, and a troubled look came into his eyes. He shuddered. "I don't think I can go in, Alan," he murmured. "It is nothing to me. I don't require you," said Campbell coldly. Dorian half opened the door. As he did so, he saw the face of his portrait leering in the sunlight. On the floor in front of it the torn curtain was lying. He remembered that the night before he had forgotten, for the first time in his life, to hide the fatal canvas, and was about to rush forward when he drew back with a shudder. What was that loathsome red dew that gleamed, wet and glistening, on one of the hands, as though the canvas had sweated blood? How horrible it was! More horrible, it seemed to him for the moment, than the silent thing that he knew was stretched across the table, the thing whose grotesque, misshapen shadow on the spotted carpet showed him that it had not stirred, but was still there, as he had left it. He heaved a deep breath, opened the door a little wider, and with half-closed eyes and averted head, walked quickly in, determined that he would not look up even once upon the dead man. Then, stooping down and taking up the gold and purple hanging, he flung it right over the picture. There he stopped, afraid to turn round, and his eyes fixed themselves on the intricacies of the pattern before him. He heard Campbell bringing in the heavy chest and the irons and the other things that he had required for his dreadful work. He began to wonder if he and Basil Hallward had ever met, and, if so, what they had thought of each other. "Leave me now," said a stern voice behind him. He turned and hurried out, just conscious that the dead man had been thrust back into the chair, and that Campbell was gazing into a glistening, yellow face. As he was going downstairs he heard the key being turned in the lock. It was long after 7 when Campbell came back into the library. He was pale, but absolutely calm. "I have done what you asked me to do," he muttered. "And now, good-bye. Let us never see each other again." "You have saved me from ruin, Alan. I cannot forget that," said Dorian simply. As soon as Campbell had left, he went upstairs. There was a horrible smell of nitric acid in the room, but the thing that had been sitting at the table was gone. And that was chapter 14. We'll take about a minute's worth of pause if anybody has anything they want to discuss about chapter 14 and Dorian's consistent descent into depravity. Lazy Cow, thank you for resubscribing and welcome back to the fold. Much appreciated. And Cece, you translated the poem? The poem went, "On a chromatic scale, the breast of dripping Paris, the Venus of the Adriatic leaves its pink and white body from the water. The domes on the azure of the waves, following the sentence with a pure outline, swell like round throats, that raises a sigh of love. The skiff lands and drops me, throwing its mooring to the pillar, in front of a pink facade, on the marble of a staircase. In front of a pink facade, on the marble of a staircase." Interesting. What's your off-topic thing, Harvest? Maybe it's because I don't speak French. And so, like, a direct translation is not as good. But that poem sounds vaguely ominous to me. At rank 2 subscriber, you seem to get less magic points? That shouldn't be right. Although it does seem to me, hang on. I'm not sure whether Twitch has changed something. I know that it's supposed to go up as you go higher. Yes, he was a scientist named Alan Him and Dorian used to be really close. It's implied maybe they had some kind of a relationship. They did some bad stuff together. They stopped talking to each other suddenly, and everybody remarked about it, but nobody knows why, and it seems like it's something horrible. Ah, they changed the system. Tier 1 is now 60. So they made it harder to get magic? Oof. What a terrible time for me to, like, have highly priced channel rewards. Ah. Well, that's a shame. I'm sorry about that, Harvest. When did they do that? They never told me. They never messaged and said. I feel like that would be important for them to do. But yeah. So I don't actually think that there's that much to discuss about that chapter. It's just definitely somehow I wish you the best of luck, kind of. Kind of. Oh man, Dark Souls. It's fine. It's fine. Look at you guys going! Look at you all going! I guess I shouldn't have reminded you about the challenges, huh? Alright. That being said, let's start chapter 15. That evening at 8:30, exquisitely dressed and wearing a large buttonhole of Parma violets, Dorian Gray was ushered into Lady Narborough's drawing room by bowing servants. His forehead was throbbing with maddened nerves, and he felt wildly excited, but his manner as he bent over his hostess's hand was as easy and graceful as ever. Perhaps one never seems so much at one's ease as when one has to play a part. Certainly no one looking at Dorian Gray that night could have believed that he had passed through a tragedy as horrible as any tragedy of our age. Hi, Dawn. The only thing that you missed in the last chapter was that Dorian brought one of his friends, who is no longer his friend, to ask for help disposing of the body, and when that guy refused, he blackmailed him. That's what you've missed. And we're now on chapter 15 at the very beginning. Those finely shaped fingers could never have clutched a knife for sin, nor those smiling lips have cried out on God and goodness. He himself could not help wondering at the calm of his demeanor, and for a moment felt keenly the terrible pleasure of a double life. It was a small party, got up rather in a hurry by Lady Narborough, who was a very clever woman, with what Lord Henry used to describe as the remains of really remarkable ugliness. She had proved an excellent wife to one of our most tedious ambassadors, and having buried her husband properly in a marble mausoleum, which she had herself designed, and married off her daughter to some rich, rather elderly men, she devoted herself now to the pleasures of French fiction, French cookery, and French esprit when she could get it. Dorian was one of her special favorites, and she always told him that she was extremely glad she had not met him in early life. "I know, my dear, I should have fallen madly in love with you," she used to say, "and thrown my bonnet right over the mills for your sake. It is most fortunate that you were not thought of at the time. As it was, our bonnets were so unbecoming, and the mills were so occupied in trying to raise the wind, that I never had even a flirtation with anybody. However, that was all Narborough's fault. He was dreadfully short-sighted, and there was no pleasure in taking in a husband who never sees anything." Her guests this evening were rather tedious. The fact was, as she explained to Dorian behind a very shabby fan, one of her married daughters had come up quite suddenly to stay with her, and, to make matters worse, had actually brought her husband with her. "I think it is most unkind of her, my dear," she whispered. "Of course I go and stay with them every summer after I come from Hamburg, but then an older woman like me must have fresh air sometimes. And besides, I really wake them up. You don't know what an existence they lead down there. It is pure unadulterated country life. They get up early because they have so much to do, and go to bed early because they have so little to think about. There has not been a scandal in the neighborhood since the time of Queen Elizabeth, and consequently they all fall asleep after dinner. You shan't sit next to either of them. You shall sit by me and amuse me." Dorian murmured a graceful compliment and looked around the room. Yes, it was certainly a tedious party. Two of the people he had never seen before, and the others consisted of Ernest Harrowden, one of those middle-aged mediocrities so common in London clubs who have no enemies but are thoroughly disliked by their friends, Lady Rexton, an overdressed woman of 47, with a hooked nose, who was always trying to get herself compromised, but was so peculiarly plain that, to her great disappointment, no one would ever believe anything against her. Mrs. Erlynne, a pushing nobody, with a delightful lisp and Venetian red hair. Lady Alice Chapman, his hostess's daughter, a dowdy, dull girl with one of those characteristic British faces that, once seen, are never remembered, and her husband, a red-cheeked, white-whiskered creature who, like so many of his class, was under the impression that inordinate joviality can atone for an entire lack of ideas. He was rather sorry he had come, till Lady Narborough, looking at the great ormolu-gilt clock that sprawled in gaudy curves on the mauve-draped mantel-shelf, exclaimed, "How horrible of Henry Wotton to be so late! I sent round to him this morning on chance, and he promised faithfully not to disappoint me." It was some consolation that Harry was to be there, when the door opened and he heard his slow, musical voice lending charm to some insincere apology. He ceased to feel bored. But at dinner he could not eat anything. Plate after plate went away untasted. Lady Narborough kept scolding him for what she called an insult to poor Adolphe, who invented the menu specially for you. And now and then Lord Henry looked across at him, wondering at his silence and abstracted manner. From time to time the butler filled his glass with champagne. He drank eagerly, and his thirst seemed to increase. "Dorian," said Lord Henry at last, as the Chaudfroid was being handed round, "what is the matter with you tonight? You are quite out of sorts." "I believe he is in love," cried Lady Narborough, "and that he is afraid to tell me for fear I should be jealous." "He's quite right. I certainly should." "Dear Lady Narborough," murmured Dorian, smiling, "I have not been in love for a whole week. Not, in fact, since Madame de Ferrol left town." "How can you men fall in love with that woman?" exclaimed the old lady. "I really cannot understand it." "It is simply because she remembers you when you were a little girl, Lady Narborough," said Lord Henry. "She is the one link between us and your short frocks." "She does not remember my short frocks at all, Lord Henry. But I remember her very well at Vienna 30 years ago, and how décolletée she was then." "She's still décolletée," he answered, taking an olive in his long fingers. "And when she is in a very smart gown she looks like an édition de luxe of a bad French novel. She is really wonderful, and full of surprises. Her capacity for family affection is extraordinary. When her third husband died, her hair turned quite gold from grief." "How can you, Harry?" cried Dorian. "It is a most romantic explanation," laughed the hostess. "But her third husband, Lord Henry? You don't mean to say Ferrol is the fourth?" "Certainly, Lady Narborough." "I don't believe a word of it." "Well, ask Mr. Gray. He is one of her most intimate friends." "Is it true, Mr. Gray?" "She assures me so, Lady Narborough," said Dorian. "I asked her whether, like Marguerite de Nevers, she had their hearts embalmed and hung at her girdle. She told me she didn't, because none of them had had any hearts at all." "4 husbands! Upon my word, that is trop de zèle." "Trop d'audace, I tell her," said Dorian. "Oh, she is audacious enough for anything, my dear. And what is Ferrol like? I don't know him." "The husbands of very beautiful women belong to the criminal classes," said Lord Henry, sipping his wine. Lady Narborough hit him with her fan. "Lord Henry, I am not at all surprised that the world says that you are extremely wicked." "But what world says that?" said Lord Henry, elevating his eyebrows. "It could only be the next world. This world and I are on excellent terms." Everybody I know says you are very wicked," cried the old lady, shaking her head. Lord Henry looked serious for some moments. "It is perfectly monstrous," he said at last, "the way people go about nowadays, saying things against one behind one's back that are absolutely and entirely untrue." "Isn't he incorrigible?" cried Dorian, leaning forward in his chair. "I hope so," said his hostess, laughing. "But really, if you all worship Madame de Ferrol in this ridiculous way, I shall have to marry again so as to be in the fashion." "You will never marry again, Lady Narborough," broke in Lord Henry. "You were far too happy. When a woman marries again it is because she detested her first husband. When a man marries again it is because he adored his first wife. Women try their luck, men risk theirs. Narborough wasn't perfect, cried the old lady. If he had been, you would not have loved him, my dear ladies, was the rejoinder. Women love us for our defects. If we have enough of them, they will forgive us everything, even our intellects. You will never ask me to dinner again after saying this, I'm afraid, Lady Narborough, but it is quite true. Of course it is true, Lord Henry. If we women did not love you for your defects, where would you all be? Not one of you would ever be married. You would be a set of unfortunate bachelors. Not, however, that that would alter you much. Nowadays all the married men live like bachelors, and all the bachelors like married men. Fin de siècle, murmured Lord Henry. Fin du globe, answered his hostess. I wish it were fin du globe, said Dorian with a sigh. Life is a great disappointment. Ah, my dear, cried Lady Narborough, putting on her gloves. Don't tell me that you have exhausted life. When a man says that, one knows that life has exhausted him. Lord Henry is very wicked, and I sometimes wish that I had been, but you are made to be good. You look so good. I must find you a nice wife. Lord Henry, don't you think that Mr. Gray should get married? I am always telling him so, Lady Narborough, said Lord Henry with a bow. Well, we must look out for a suitable match for him. I shall go through Debrett carefully tonight and draw out a list of all the eligible young ladies. With their ages, Lady Narborough? Asked Dorian. Of course with their ages. Slightly edited. But nothing must be done in a hurry. I want it to be what the Morning Post calls a suitable alliance, and I want you both to be happy. What nonsense people talk about happy marriages, exclaimed Lord Henry. A man can be happy with any woman, as long as he does not love her. Oh, what a cynic you are, cried the old lady, pushing back her chair and nodding to Lady Ruxton. You must come and dine with me soon again. You are really an admirable tonic, much better than what Sir Andrew prescribes for me. You must tell me what people you would like to meet, though. I want it to be a delightful gathering. I like men who have a future, and women who have a past, he answered. Or do you think that would make it a petticoat party? I fear so, she said, laughing as she stood up. 1,000 pardons, my dear Lady Ruxton, she added. I didn't see you hadn't finished your cigarette. Never mind, Lady Narborough. I smoke a great deal too much. I'm going to limit myself for the future. Pray don't, Lady Ruxton, said Lord Henry. Moderation is a fatal thing. Enough is as bad as a meal. More than enough is as good as a feast. Lady Ruxton glanced at him curiously. You must come and explain that to me some afternoon, Lord Henry. It sounds such a fascinating theory, she murmured as she swept out of the room. Now, mind you don't stay too long over your politics and scandal, cried Lady Narborough from the door. If you do, we are sure to squabble upstairs. The men laughed, and Mr. Chapman got up solemnly from the foot of the table and came up to the top. Dorian Gray changed his seat and went and sat by Lord Henry. Mr. Chapman began to talk in a loud voice about the situation in the House of Commons. He guffawed at his adversaries. The word doctrinaire, word full of terror to the British mind, reappeared from time to time between his explosions. An alliterative prefix served as an ornament of oratory. He hoisted the Union Jack on the pinnacle of thought. The inherited stupidity of the race, sound English common sense, he jovially termed it, was shown to be the proper bulwark for society. A smile curved Lord Henry's lips, and he turned round and looked at Dorian. Are you better, my dear fellow? He asked. You seemed rather out of sorts at dinner. I'm quite well, Harry. I'm tired, that is all. You were charming last night. The little Duchess is quite devoted to you. She tells me she's going down to Selby. She has promised to come on the 20th. Is Monmouth to be there too? Oh, yes, Harry. He bores me dreadfully, almost as much as he bores her. She's very clever. Too clever for a woman. She lacks the indefinable charm of weakness. It is the feet of clay that makes the gold of the image precious. Her feet are very pretty, but they are not feet of clay. White porcelain feet, if you like. They have been through the fire, and what fire does not destroy, it hardens. She has had experiences. How long has she been married? Asked Dorian. An eternity, she tells me. I believe, according to the peerage, it is 10 years, but 10 years with Monmouth must have been like an eternity, with time thrown in. Who else is coming? Oh, the Willoughbys, Lord Rugby and his wife, our hostess Geoffrey Clouston, the usual set. I've asked Lord Grotrian. I like him, said Lord Henry. A great many people don't, but I find him charming. He atones for being occasionally somewhat overdressed by being always absolutely overeducated. He's a very modern type. I don't know if he'll be able to come, Harry. He may have to go to Monte Carlo with his father. Oh, what a nuisance people's people are. Try and make him come. By the way, Dorian, you ran off very early last night. You left before 11. What did you do afterwards? Did you go straight home? Dorian glanced at him hurriedly and frowned. No, Harry, he said at last. I did not get home till nearly 3. Did you go to the club? Yes, he answered. Then he bit his lip. No, I don't mean that. I didn't go to the club. I walked about. I forget what I did. How inquisitive you are, Harry! You always want to know what one has been doing. I always want to forget what I have been doing. I came in at 2:30, if you wish to know the exact time. I had left my latchkey at home and my servant had to let me in. If you want any corroborative evidence on the subject, you can ask him. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. My dear fellow, as if I cared! Let us go up to the drawing-room. No sherry, thank you, Mr. Chapman. Something else has happened to you, Dorian. Tell me what it is. You are not yourself tonight. Don't mind me, Harry. I'm irritable and out of temper. I shall come round and see you tomorrow or next day. Make my excuses to Lady Narborough. I shan't go upstairs. I shall go home. I must go home. All right, Dorian. I dare say I shall see you tomorrow at tea-time. The Duchess is coming. I will try to be there, Harry, he said, leaving the room. As he drove back to his own house, he was conscious that the sense of terror he thought he had strangled had come back to him. Lord Henry's casual questioning had made him lose his nerves for the moment, and he wanted his nerves still. Things that were dangerous had to be destroyed. He winced. He hated the idea of even touching them. Yet it had to be done. He realized that, and when he had locked the door of his library, he opened the secret press into which he had thrust Basil Hallward's coat and bag. A huge fire was blazing. He piled another log on it. The smell of the singeing clothes and burning leather was horrible. It took him 3/4 of an hour to consume everything. At the end he felt faint and sick, and having lit some Algerian pastilles in a pierced copper brazier, he bathed his hands and forehead with a cool musk-scented vinegar. Suddenly he started. His eyes grew strangely bright, and he gnawed nervously at his underlip. Between 2 of the windows stood a large Florentine cabinet, made out of ebony and inlaid with ivory and blue lapis. He watched it as though it were a thing that could fascinate and make afraid, as though it held something that he longed for and yet almost loathed. His breath quickened. A mad craving came over him. He lit a cigarette and then threw it away. His eyelids drooped till the long fringed lashes almost touched his cheek. But he still watched the cabinet. At last he got up from the sofa on which he had been lying, went over to it, and, having unlocked it, touched some hidden spring. A triangular drawer passed slowly out. His fingers moved instinctively toward it, dipped in, and closed on something. It was a small Chinese box of black and gold dust lacquer, elaborately wrought, the sides patterned with curved waves and the silken cords hung with round crystals and tasseled and plated metal threads. He opened it. Inside was a green paste, waxy in luster, the odor curiously heavy and persistent. He hesitated for some moments. Then, with a strangely immobile smile on his face, then shivering, though the atmosphere of the room was terribly hot, he drew himself up and glanced at the clock. It was 20 minutes to 12. He put the box back, shutting the cabinet doors as he did so, and went into his bedroom. As midnight was striking bronze blows upon the dusky air, Dorian Gray dressed commonly, and with some muffler wrapped round his throat, crept quietly out of the house. In Bond Street he found a hansom with a good horse. He hailed it, and in a low voice gave the driver an address. The man shook his head. "It's too far for me," he muttered. "Here's a sovereign for you," said Dorian. "You shall have another if you drive fast." "All right, sir," answered the man. "You will be there in an hour." And after his fare had got in, he turned his horse round and drove rapidly towards the river. And that was chapter 15. Weird. Felt like for half of the chapter nothing was happening, and now something's happening, but I have no idea what it is. Hey, Zach. We'll take a bit of a brief break, and then I will continue again. Hey, STL. What the heck is that green paste? Does anybody know what a green paste could be? Cheers, STL. Um, kind of. I don't know where it's going. Like, I'm waiting for Dorian's inevitable downfall, but I don't know where exactly it's going. Cheers, STL. Look at y'all going for it. Now that it pops up on the chat to tell everybody who donates, I think we'll get there a lot faster. To remind everybody. Yeah, it's a good change. I wonder when they implemented it. Would have had to have been pretty recently. Aw, I'm sorry, STL. I appreciate that you're trying to be here, though. Yeah, I don't think it was there on Thursday either. All right. I'll get started with chapter 16. A cold rain began to fall, and the blurred street lamps looked ghastly in the dripping mist. The public houses were just closing, and dim men and women were clustering in broken groups around their doors. From some of the bars came the sound of horrible laughter. In others, drunkards brawled and screamed. Lying back in the hansom with his hat pulled over his forehead, Dorian Gray watched with listless eyes the sordid shame of the great city, and now and then he repeated to himself the words that Lord Henry had said to him on the first day they had met. To cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. Yes, that was the secret. He had often tried it, and would try it again now. There were opium dens. Oh, is that what he's doing? Oh, shoot! Sorry. There were opium dens where one could buy oblivion, dens of horror where the memory of old sins could be destroyed by the madness of sins that were new. The moon hung low in the sky like a yellow skull. From time to time a huge misshapen cloud stretched a long arm across and hid it. The gas lamps grew fewer, and the streets were more narrow and gloomy. Once the man lost his way and had to drive back half a mile. A steam rose from the horse as it splashed up the puddles. The side windows of the hansom were clogged with a gray flannel mist. To cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. How the words rang in his ears! His soul certainly was sick to death. Was it true that the senses could cure it? Innocent blood had been spilt. What could atone for that? For that there was no atonement. But though forgiveness was impossible, forgetfulness was possible still. And he was determined to forget, to stamp the thing out, to crush it as one would crush the adder that had stung one. Indeed, what a right had Basil to have spoken to him as he had done? Who made him a judge over others? He had said things that were dreadful, horrible, not to be endured. On and on plodded the hansom, going slower, it seemed to him, at each step. He thrust up the trap and called to the man to drive faster. The hideous hunger for opium began to gnaw at him. His throat burned, and his delicate hands twitched nervously together. He struck at the horse madly with his stick. The driver laughed and whipped up. He laughed in answer, and the man was silent. The way seemed interminable, the streets like the black web of some sprawling spider. The monotony became unbearable, and as the mist thickened, he felt afraid. Then they passed by lonely brick-fields. The fog was lighter here, and he could see the strange bottle-shaped kilns with their orange fan-like tongues of fire. A dog barked as they went by, and far away in the darkness some wandering seagull screamed. The horse stumbled in a rut, then swerved aside and broke into a gallop. After some time they left the clay road, and rattled again over rough-paven streets. Most of the windows were dark, but now and then fantastic shadows were silhouetted against some lamplit blind. He watched them curiously. They moved like monstrous marionettes, and made gestures like live things. He hated them. A dull rage was in his heart. As they turned a corner, a woman yelled something at them from an open door, and two men ran after the hansom for about 100 yards. The driver beat at them with his whip. Oh my God. It is said that passion makes one think in a circle. Certainly with hideous iteration, the bitten lips of Dorian Gray shaped and reshaped those subtle words that dealt with soul and sense, till he had found in them the full expression, as it were, of his mood, and justified, by his intellectual approval, passions that, without such justification, would still have dominated his temper. From cell to cell of his brain crept the one thought, and the wild desire to live, most terrible of all man's appetites, quickened into force each trembling nerve and fibre. Ugliness that had once been hateful to him because it made things real, became dear to him now for that very reason. Ugliness was the one reality. The coarse brawl, the loathsome den, the crude violence of disordered life, the very vileness of thief and outcast, were more vivid, in their intense actuality of impression, than all the gracious shapes of art, the dreamy shadows of song. They were what he needed for forgetfulness. In 3 days he would be free. Suddenly the man drew up with a jerk at the top of a dark lane. Over the low roofs and jagged chimney stacks of the houses rose the black masts of ships. Wreaths of white mist clung like ghostly sails to the yards. "Somewhere about here, sir, ain't it?" he asked huskily through the trap. Dorian started and peeped round. "This will do," he answered, and having got out hastily and given the driver the extra fare he had promised him, he walked quickly in the direction of the quay. Here and there a lantern gleamed at the stern of some huge merchantman. The light shook and splintered in the puddles. A red glare came from an outward-bound steamer that was coaling. The slimy pavement looked like a wet mackintosh. He hurried on towards the left, glancing back now and then to see if he was being followed. In about 7 or 8 minutes he reached a small shabby house that was wedged in between 2 gaunt factories. In one of the top windows stood a lamp. He stopped and gave a peculiar knock. After a little time he heard steps in the passage, and the chain being unhooked. The door opened quietly, and he went in without saying a word to the squat misshapen figure that flattened itself into the shadow as he passed. At the end of the hall hung a tattered green curtain that swayed and shook in the gusty wind, which had followed him in from the street. He dragged it aside and entered a long, low room which looked as if it had once been a third-rate dancing saloon. Shrill, flaring gas jets, dulled and distorted in the fly-blown mirrors that faced them, were ranged round the walls. Greasy reflectors of ribbed tin backed them, making quivering disks of light. The floor was covered with ochre-colored sawdust, trampled here and there into mud, and stained with dark rings of spilt liquor. Some Malays were crouching by a little charcoal stove, playing with bone counters, and showing their white teeth as they chattered. In one corner, with his head buried in his arms, a sailor sprawled over a table, and by the tawdrily painted bar that ran across one complete side stood 2 haggard women, mocking an old man who was brushing the sleeves of his coat with an expression of disgust. "He thinks he's got red ants on him," laughed one of them as Dorian passed by. The man looked at her in terror and began to whimper. At the end of the room there was a little staircase, leading to a darkened chamber. As Dorian hurried up its 3 rickety steps, the heavy odor of opium met him. He heaved a deep breath, and his nostrils quivered with pleasure. When he entered, a young man with smooth yellow hair, who was bending over a lamp, lighting a long, thin pipe, looked up at him, and nodded in a hesitating manner. "You here, Adrian?" muttered Dorian. "Where else should I be?" he answered listlessly. "None of the chaps will speak to me now." "I thought you had left England." "Darlington is not going to do anything. My brother paid the bill at last. George doesn't speak to me either. I don't care," he added with a sigh. "As long as one has this stuff, one doesn't want friends. I think I've had too many friends." Dorian winced and looked round at the grotesque things that lay in such fantastic postures on the ragged mattresses. The twisted limbs, the gaping mouths, the staring lustreless eyes fascinated him. He knew in what strange heavens they were suffering, and what dull hells were teaching them the secret of some new joy. They were better off than he was. He was prisoned in thought. Memory, like a horrible malady, was eating his soul away. From time to time he seemed to see the eyes of Basil Hallward looking at him. Yet he felt he could not stay. The presence of Adrian Singleton troubled him. He wanted to be where no one would know who he was. He wanted to escape from himself. "I'm going on to the other place," he said after a pause. "On the wharf?" "Yes." "That mad cat is sure to be there. They won't have her in this place now." Dorian shrugged his shoulders. I'm sick of women who love one. I'm sick of women who love one. Women who hate one are much more interesting. Besides, the stuff is better. Much the same. I like it better. Come and have something to drink. I must have something. I don't want anything, murmured the young man. Never mind. Adrian Singleton rose up wearily and followed Dorian to the bar. A half-caste, in a rugged turban and a shabby ulster, grinned a hideous greeting as he thrust a bottle of brandy and 2 tumblers in front of them. The women sidled up and began to chatter. Dorian turned his back on them and said something in a low voice to Adrian Singleton. A crooked smile, like a Malay crease, writhed across the face of one of the women. "We're very proud tonight," she sneered. "For God's sake, don't talk to me," cried Dorian, stamping his foot on the ground. "What do you want? Money? Here it is. Don't ever talk to me again." 2 red sparks flashed for a moment in the woman's sodden eyes, then flickered out and left them dull and glazed. She tossed her head and raked the coins off the counter with greedy fingers. Her companion watched her enviously. "It's no use," sighed Adrian Singleton. "I don't care to go back. What does it matter? I'm quite happy here." "You'll write to me if you want anything, won't you?" said Dorian after a pause. "Perhaps." "Good night, then." "Good night," answered the young man, passing up the steps and wiping his parched mouth with a handkerchief. Dorian walked to the door with a look of pain on his face. As he drew the curtain aside, a hideous laugh broke from the painted lips of the woman who had taken his money. "There goes the devil's bargain," she hiccuped in a hoarse voice. "Curse you!" he answered. "Don't call me that." She snapped her fingers. "Prince Charming is what you like to be called, ain't it?" she yelled after him. The drowsy sailor leapt to his feet as she spoke, and looked wildly round. The sound of the shuttering of the hall door fell on his ear. He rushed out as if in pursuit. Dorian Gray. Is it? Dorian Gray hurried along the... Is it quay or quay? Quay. You're right, it's pronounced quay. Dorian Gray hurried along the quay through the drizzling rain. His meeting with Adrian Singleton had strangely moved him, and he wondered if the ruin of that young life was really to be laid at his door, as Basil Hallward had said to him with such infamy of insult. He bit his lip, and for a few seconds his eyes grew sad. Yet, after all, what did it matter to him? One's days were too brief to take the burden of another's errors on one's shoulders. Each man lived his own life, and paid his own price for living it. The only pity was one had to pay so often for a single fault. One had to pay over and over again indeed. In her dealings with man, destiny never closed her accounts. There are moments, psychologists tell us, when the passion for sin, or for what the world calls sin, so dominates a nature that every fiber of the body, as every cell of the brain, seems to be instinct with fearful impulses. Men and women at such moments lose the freedom of their will. They move to their terrible end as an automaton's move. Choice is taken from them, and conscience is either killed, or, if it lives at all, lives but to give rebellion in its fascination and disobedience its charm. For all sins, as theologians weary not of reminding us, are sins of disobedience. When that high spirit, that morning star of evil, fell from heaven, it was as a rebel that he fell. Callous, concentrated on evil, with stained mind and soul hungry for rebellion, Dorian Gray hastened on, quickening his step as he went. But as he darted aside into a dim archway that had served him often as a shortcut to the ill-famed place where he was going, he felt himself suddenly seized from behind, and before he had time to defend himself, he was thrust back against the wall, with a brutal hand round his throat. He struggled madly for life, and by a terrible effort wrenched the tightened fingers away. In a second he heard the click of a revolver, and saw the gleam of a polished barrel pointing straight at his head, and the dusky form of a short, thick-set man facing him. "What do you want?" he gasped. "Keep quiet," said the man. "If you stir, I shoot you." "You're mad! What have I done to you?" "You wrecked the life of Sybil Vane," was the answer. "And Sybil Vane was my sister. She killed herself. I know it. Her death is at your door. I swore I would kill you in return. For years I have sought you. I had no clue, no trace. The two people who could have described you were dead. I knew nothing of you but the pet name she used to call you. I heard it tonight by chance. Make your peace with God, for tonight you are going to die." Dorian Gray grew sick with fear. "I never knew her," he stammered. "I never heard of her. You're mad." "You had better confess your sin, for as sure as I am James Vane, you are going to die." There was a horrible moment. Dorian did not know what to say or do. "Down on your knees!" growled the man. "I give you 1 minute to make your peace. No more. I go on board tonight for India, and I must do my job first. 1 minute. That's all." Dorian's arms fell to his side. Paralyzed with terror, he did not know what to do. Suddenly a wild hope flashed across his brain. "Stop!" he cried. "How long ago is it since your sister died? Quick, tell me." 18 years, said the man. "Why do you ask me? What do years matter?" 18 years? Laughed Dorian Gray with a touch of triumph in his voice. 18 years! Set me under the lamp and look at my face." James Vane hesitated for a moment, not understanding what was meant. Then he seized Dorian Gray and dragged him from the archway. Dim and wavering as was the wind-blown light, yet it served to show him the hideous error, as it seemed, into which he had fallen. For the face of the man he had sought to kill had all the bloom of boyhood, all the unstained purity of youth. He seemed little more than a lad of 20 summers, hardly older, if older indeed at all, than his sister had been when they had parted so many years ago. It was obvious that this was not the man who had destroyed her life. He loosened his hold and reeled back. "My God! My God!" he cried. "And I would have murdered you!" Dorian Gray drew a long breath. "You have been on the brink of committing a terrible crime, my man," he said, looking at him sternly. "Let this be a warning to you not to take vengeance into your own hands." "Forgive me, sir," muttered James Vane. "I was deceived. A chance word I heard in that damned den set me on the wrong track." "You had better go home and put that pistol away, or you may get into trouble," said Dorian, turning on his heel and going slowly down the street. James Vane stood on the pavement in horror. He was trembling from head to foot. After a little while a black shadow that had been creeping along the dripping wall moved out into the light and came close to him with stealthy footsteps. He felt a hand laid on his arm and looked round with a start. It was one of the women who had been drinking at the bar. "Why didn't you kill him?" she hissed out, putting her haggard face quite close to his. "I knew you were following him when you rushed out from Daly's, you fool! You should have killed him! He's lots of money, and he's as bad as bad!" "He's not the man I'm looking for," he answered, "and I want no man's money. I want a man's life. The man whose life I want must be nearly 40 now. This one is little more than a boy. Thank God I have not got his blood upon my hands." The woman gave a bitter laugh. "Little more than a boy!" she sneered. "Why, man, it's nigh on 18 years since Prince Charming made me what I am." "You lie!" cried James Vane. She raised her hand up to heaven. "Before God, I'm telling the truth," she cried. "Before God?" "Strike me dumb if it ain't so. He's the worst one that comes here. They say he's sold himself to the devil for a pretty face. It's nigh on 18 years since I met him. He hasn't changed much since then. I have, though," she added with a sickly leer. "You swear this?" "I swear it," came in a hoarse echo from her flat mouth. "But don't give me away to him," she whined. "I'm afraid of him. Let me have some money for my night's lodging." He broke from her with an oath and rushed to the corner of the street, but Dorian Gray had disappeared. When he looked back, the woman had vanished also. That's the end of chapter 16. Listen, I'm just saying that I'm sitting here waiting for Dorian to die. Like, I mean, it's fine, but like, I just want him to die. I'm not rooting for him at all. I want him dead. I want him to be dead. That's where I'm at. Nice water. Thank you for teaching me how to correctly pronounce Florida Key. I hate Dorian so much. Cheers, STL. Yes, we did, Zek. Yeah, Harvest? Are you on Dorian's side? Is anyone on Dorian's side? Is anyone even a little bit like, yeah, I want to see how far he'll go? All right. You know what, Harvest? I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you how to read a story. You go ahead. You like Dorian. He deserves somebody. Well, no, not deserves. He should have somebody on his side, you know? He's such a pitiful character. Bella should date Dorian, not Edward. You're on the side of attractive. Oh dear. You are interested to see how far down he'll dig. Man, I just want him dead. I'm just like, kill him, end the book. Like, forget this guy. Things keep happening to him and letting him get away with stuff, and I'm like, boo! Boo! Hiss! Boo! Plastic Ape, you're sad for Dorian? That's a much more compassionate perspective than I have. Parable, you say? Curious. We're not done yet, but we are getting close. Maybe we will be able to finish this book. Sure, I love hedonism, but... Ah. Hmm. This is fascinating. So you guys are like, so you guys are still interested in what's happening here? An interesting character. Every horrible person in closed circles that gets away with the status quo. Yes, that is correct. I mean, I agree with that, Chase. We should all have magically talented friends because that would mean that we would all be the magically talented friend as well. You know, if everybody deserves a magically talented friend, suddenly everybody becomes magical as long as you have friendship. Friendship is magic! My Little Pony was right! Okay. Let us begin. Chapter 17. A week later, Dorian Gray was sitting in the conservatory at Selby Royal talking to the pretty Duchess of Monmouth, who, with her husband, a jaded-looking man of 60, was amongst his guests. It was tea time, and the mellow light of the huge lace-covered lamp that stood on the table lit up the delicate china and hammered silver of the service at which the Duchess was presiding. Her white hands were moving daintily among the cups, and her full red lips were smiling at something that Dorian had whispered to her. Lord Henry was lying back in a silk-draped wicker chair looking at them. On a peach-colored divan sat Lady Narborough, pretending to listen to the Duke's description of the last Brazilian beetles that he had added to his collection. 3 young men in elaborate smoking suits were handing tea-cakes to some of the women. The house party consisted of 12 people, and there were more expected to arrive on the next day. "What are you two talking about?" said Lord Henry, strolling over to the table and putting his cup down. "I hope Dorian has told you about my plan for rechristening everything, Gladys. It's a delightful idea." "But I don't want to be rechristened, Harry," rejoined the Duchess, looking up at him with her wonderful eyes. "I'm quite satisfied with my own name, and I'm sure Mr. Gray would be satisfied with his." "My dear Gladys, I would not alter either name for the world. They're both perfect, and I was thinking chiefly of flowers. Yesterday I cut an orchid for my buttonhole. It was a marvelous spotted thing, as effective as the 7 deadly sins. In a thoughtless moment I asked one of the gardeners what it was called. He told me it was a fine specimen of Robinsoniana, or something dreadful of that kind. It's a sad truth, but we've lost the faculty of giving lovely names to things. Names are everything. I never quarrel with actions. My one quarrel is with words. That is the reason I hate vulgar realism in literature. The man who could call a spade should be compelled to use one. It's the only thing he's fit for." Then what should we call you, Harry?" she asked. "His name is Prince Paradox," said Dorian. "I recognize him in a flash," exclaimed the Duchess. "I won't hear of it," laughed Lord Henry, sinking into a chair. "From a label there is no escape. I refuse the title." Royalties may not abdicate, fell as a warning from pretty lips. You wish me to defend my throne, then? Yes. I give the truths of tomorrow. I prefer the mistakes of today, she answered. You disarm me, Gladys, he cried, catching the willfulness of her mood. Of your shield, Harry, not your spear. I never tilt against beauty, he said, with a wave of his hand. That is your error, Harry. Believe me, you value beauty far too much. How can you say that? I admit that I think that it is better to be beautiful than to be good, but, on the other hand, no one is more ready than I am to acknowledge that it is better to be good than to be ugly. Ugliness is one of the 7 deadly sins, then? Cried the Duchess. What becomes of your simile about the orchid? Ugliness is one of the 7 deadly virtues, Gladys. You, as a good Tory, must not underrate them. Beer, the Bible, and the 7 deadly virtues have made our England what she is. You don't like your country, then? She asked. I live in it. That you may censure it the better. Would you have me take the verdict of Europe on it? He inquired. What do they say of us? That Tartuffe has emigrated to England and opened a shop. Is that yours, Harry? I give it to you. I could not use it. It's too true. You need not be afraid. Our countrymen never recognize a description. They're practical. They are more cunning than practical. When they make up their ledger, they balance stupidity by wealth and vice by hypocrisy. Still, we've done great things. Great things have been thrust on us, Gladys. We've carried their burden. Only as far as the stock exchange. She shook her head. I believe in the race, she cried. It represents the survival of the pushing. It has development. Decay fascinates me more. What of art? She asked. It's a malady. Love? An illusion. Religion? The fashionable substitute for belief. You are a skeptic. Never! Skepticism is the beginning of faith. What are you? To define is to limit. Give me a clue. Thread snap. You would lose your way in the labyrinth. You bewilder me. Let us talk of someone else. Our host is a delightful topic. Years ago he was christened Prince Charming. Oh, don't remind me of that, cried Dorian Gray. Our host is rather horrid this evening, answered the Duchess, coloring. I believe he thinks that Monmouth married me purely on scientific principles as the best specimen he could find of a modern butterfly. Well, I hope he won't stick pins into you, Duchess, laughed Dorian. Oh, my maid does that already, Mr. Gray, when she's annoyed with me. And what does she get annoyed with you about, Duchess? For the most trivial things, Mr. Gray, I assure you. Usually because I come in at 10 minutes to 9 and tell her that I must be dressed by 8:30. How unreasonable of her! You should give her warning. I daren't, Mr. Gray. Why, she invents hats for me. You remember the one I wore at Lady Hillstone's garden party? You don't, but it is nice of you to pretend that you do. Well, she made it out of nothing. All good hats are made out of nothing. Like all good reputations, Gladys, interrupted Lord Henry. Every effect that one produces gives one an enemy. To be popular one must be a mediocrity. Not with women, said the Duchess, shaking her head. And women rule the world. I assure you we can't bear mediocrities. We women, as someone says, love with our ears, just as you men love with your eyes, if you ever love at all. It seems to me that we never do anything else, murmured Dorian. Ah, then you never really love, Mr. Gray, answered the Duchess, with mock sadness. My dear Gladys, cried Lord Henry, how can you say that? Romance lives by repetition, and repetition converts an appetite into an art. Besides, each time that one loves is the only time one has ever loved. Difference of object does not alter singleness of passion, it merely intensifies it. We can have in life but one great experience at best, and the secret of life is to reproduce that experience as often as possible. Even when one has been wounded by it, Harry? Asked the Duchess after a pause. Especially when one has been wounded by it, answered Lord Henry. The Duchess turned and looked at Dorian Gray with a curious expression in her eyes. What do you say to that, Mr. Gray? She inquired. Dorian hesitated for a moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. I always agree with Harry, Duchess. Even when he's wrong? Harry's never wrong, Duchess. And does his philosophy make you happy? I've never searched for happiness. Who wants happiness? I've searched for pleasure. And found it, Mr. Gray? Often. Too often. The Duchess sighed. I am searching for peace, she said, and if I don't go and dress, I shall have none this evening. Let me get you some orchids, Duchess, cried Dorian, starting to his feet and walking down the conservatory. You're flirting disgracefully with him, said Lord Henry to his cousin. You had better take care. He's very fascinating. If he were not, there would be no battle. Greek meets Greek, then. I'm on the side of the Trojans. They fought for a woman. They were defeated. There are worse things than capture, she answered. You gallop with a loose rein. Pace gives life, was the riposte. I shall write it in my diary tonight. What? That a burnt child loves the fire. I'm not even singed. My wings are untouched. You use them for everything except flight. Courage has passed from men to women. It's a new experience for us. You have a rival. Who? He laughed. Lady Narborough, he whispered. She perfectly adores him. You fill me with apprehension. The appeal to antiquity is fatal to us who are romanticists. Romanticists? You have all the methods of science. Men have educated us, but not explained you. Describe us as a sex, was her challenge. Sphinxes without secrets. She looked at him, smiling. How long Mr. Gray is, she said. Let us go and help him. I have not yet told him the color of my frock. Ah, you must suit your frock to his flowers, Gladys. That would be a premature surrender. Romantic art begins with its climax. I must keep an opportunity for retreat. In the Parthian manner, they found safety in the desert. I could not do that. Women are not always allowed a choice, he answered, but hardly had he finished the sentence before from the far end of the conservatory came a stifled groan, followed by the dull sound of a heavy fall. Everybody started up. The Duchess stood motionless in horror, and with fear in his eyes Lord Henry rushed through the flapping palms to find Dorian Gray lying face downwards on the tiled floor in a death-like swoon. He was carried at once into the blue drawing-room and laid upon one of the sofas. After a short time he came to himself and looked round with a dazed expression. "What has happened?" he asked. "Oh, I remember. Am I safe here, Harry?" He began to tremble. "My dear Dorian," answered Lord Henry, "you merely fainted, that was all. You must have overtired yourself. You had better not come down to dinner. I will take your place." "No, I will come down," he said, struggling to his feet. "I would rather come down. I must not be alone." He went to his room and dressed. There was a wild recklessness of gaiety in his manner as he sat at the table, but now and then a thrill of terror ran through him when he remembered that, pressed against the window of the conservatory like a white handkerchief, he had seen the face of James Vane watching him. Dun-dun-dun-dun! Ooh, we are very close to the end of this book. We are very close to the end of this book. Uh-oh. Embity, people fainted all the time. Yeah, reading these long conversations between a bunch of rich people, I'm just thinking like, dang, you guys really didn't have anything to do back then. Dang, dude. Like, all that money, you just sit around talking nonsense to each other all day and, like, don't even seem to be enjoying it. Like, listening to that conversation, I'm like, how witty. Are you guys fulfilled as humans? Are you guys doing okay? I'm worried that all of you have depression. That's fair, Chase. That's fair. I've always thought, like, who wouldn't love to be, like, a noble and to sit around because, like, I would use that time to, like, study and be a scholar all day. But, like, in actuality, I don't think I would like it if that were my only option. Also, I'd be a woman as a noble, and that never goes very well. I'd be able to do a lot of charity. Maybe. Maybe, if they let me. So much depression. From inactivity and boredom and, you know, stifling life. You could also paint. And I could play piano. And I could write letters to people, and go on a walk, but not too fast. No fervent exercise for the ladies back then. It was thought to be very scandalous. It stimulated them too much. How uncouth. I guess I could gossip about people. Cheers, STL. You were allowed to maybe not paint, but you're allowed to like sketch. Like they taught ladies how to draw all the time. Are they not rich enough to enact change? I wonder. I wonder. I mean, half of them were in parliament and stuff, so well, the women couldn't have done anything, but the men could. Maybe they just needed to like find first things first. A. Be born an extremely rich noblewoman. B. Be given the choice of who to marry. C. Marry a guy who's gonna put all of the things that I want enacted into Congress. Bam! There you go. I'm sure everybody will vote for my proclamation for the vote for women and also all peoples, and maybe let's stop colonialism, and also like brown people are cool, stop being racist, and I think everybody's gonna be fine with that. Hey Tim. That's fair. Yeah, that's it. Who wants to help me find a rich husband who hopefully I would love, but hey, probably not. Not in this time. He's gonna be like, now, bear my children, and I'm gonna be like, half office work, half beach day. Hey, thanks, I really like this shirt. A morally upstanding servant. Yeah, servants have definitely never had a bad time in life. Ever. Mm-mm. 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 I don't think that, like, it depends on your husband whether you were allowed to do that, and that's pretty gross. Yeah, being a servant was like meant that you were being a servant wasn't great. Basically, you could like, oh, you know what? I'd want to be part of the nouveau rich. I'd want to be that like, like right as the Industrial Revolution was starting up and all those like people were suddenly making money and like all these like the poorer classes were becoming rich and noble, or as rich as the nobility, and the nobility were like, oh, they don't know how to behave any blah blah. Oh, the manners blah. Thank you for the 100 bits and letting the bit pony ride, Plastic Ape. Oh yeah, they could send you off to the crazy house anytime you wanted, huh? And eating it raw was acceptable. Alas. Hey, aren't we glad that we are not living in those times and we're living in 2020? Looks outside the window. Ah! Are you almost at the level where you get to unlock it? Sometimes you have to refresh. Hopefully it unlocked if that's the thing. I want to be Elon Musk. I just want to be able to make change in some way. I just want the society to be better, guys. So fake tranquil. I know. Hey, there you go, Plastic Ape. There it is. I know, Chase. We were lied to as kids, and now everything's going to poop, and we're like, why is it like this? But it's like always like that if you look at history. But like it's stressful for us because they lied to us about how nice everything was and was going to continue to be while we were old. And turns out humanity's like this. Where did this come from, Where did the boss come from? Oh, that's a bit reward. So, since I'm not partnered yet, I can't add any new emotes, but I can add emotes as bit rewards, which, like, it stinks that they're behind another paywall. But that's where that one came from. Well, they were more like the calm in front of the storm. Like, there was definitely stuff still going down in the 90s. It's just that, like, I don't know, we just. What happened in the 90s? Everybody just, like, agreed to not think anymore. Everyone was like, hey, what if we just don't? Woo! Let's party, 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 party. And that was the 90s. Yeah, we took a break. Everyone was like, meh. Oh, definitely. I do that every day, STL. Trust me, actually. Ever since I was like 12, I've been trying to improve myself as a person, so I'm pretty solid on that. On that like progress of personal growth. Oh wait, is that a song lyric? Is that Michael Jackson? Aw, man. Yeah, the Rodney King. Yeah, that was the 90s. There's lots of stuff. Man, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know things. The 90s weren't that happy a time. The 90s weren't that happy. We were just kids. We were just kids. I mean, we all got like shook out of that like peaceful calm of the 90s in 2001. So like, we all should have known from there. I've said this before, but I always take comfort in history and in reading history. And like I just find it like genuinely I find it super comforting to read about times that were as turbulent as these and just like also read about people just like chilling and leading their lives and also crazy stuff that's happened that you would be like that didn't happen in real life but that happened. I find it all very comforting. We're all just humans making our way on this tiny little planet trying to control and improve the things that we can. That's all it was. That's all we are. Yeah, I recognize that it was Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson. I can't tell when it comes to streams. That's fair, Chase. That's fair. Also, we had a cultural explosion. We had a cultural explosion back then. Exactly, Cece. Sonder. I love the term sonder. Yeah. Yeah. Just like, hey, be nice to each other. We're all just out here struggling and trying to do the very best that we can. Just be nice to each other. Be nice to all kinds of people. Be nice to people who are different from you and be nice to people who are the same from you. Be nice to people who are minorities and be nice to people who are the majorities, unless they're a jerk to you. But like, gotta give them the chance to be nice before you start being mean to them. Hey, Age. Alright, that being said, let's get into chapter 18 of Dorian Gray. It looks like this boy gonna get murdered. I'm hype. The next day, he did not leave food. Hmm. It depends on how long what you're. We're on chapter 18. Zek, it depends on how long you think making the food will be. I'd say, if you can possibly at all, if you are comfortable doing this, trying to time it towards the end of the stream, because I won't be able to eat any food while I'm reading aloud on stream. So depending on how long whatever you're gonna take, whatever you're gonna make will be, if it's convenient for your schedule. I'm gonna end when this book is over because we have like We have, I think, 3 chapters to read. So we're decently close, but it's probably going to take me like at least another 30 minutes to an hour. Probably. But Oscar Wilde had to get his witticisms in. I forgot. That's hilarious. I love that. Oh, you wanted to read this book? Aw. Aye. Man, that stinks. Nice, Dawn. And thank you for the host, H. I've said this before, but I had to swap over to Stream Elements for the donation page, so it has all the alerts now, and not all of them are working. So I'm sorry that the host did not trigger, but I'll fix it over time. And also, it's now going to be safe for you guys to donate because apparently Streamlabs is predatory in certain ways that I wasn't aware of. So hooray, we've swapped over to a safer thing. And you can actually donate not using PayPal if you want to now. Okay. Let's see. The next day he did not leave the house, and indeed spent most of the time in his own room, sick with a wild terror of dying, and yet indifferent to life itself. The consciousness of being hunted, snared, tracked down, had begun to dominate him. If the tapestry did but tremble in the wind, he shook. The dead leaves that were blown against the leaded panes seemed to him like his own wasted resolutions and wild regrets. I'm sorry, that's not bad writing at all. I just like love how like completely self-centered a person you have to be to look outside your window and see leaves blowing in the wind and be like, those are my wasted regrets. Okay, dude. When he closed his eyes, he saw again the sailor's face peering through the mist-stained glass, and horror seemed once more to lay its hand upon his heart. But perhaps it had been only his fancy that had called vengeance out of the night and set the hideous shapes of punishment before him. Actual life was chaos, but there was something terribly logical in the imagination. It was the imagination that set remorse to dog the feet of sin. It was the imagination that made each crime bear its misshapen brood. In the common world of fact, the wicked were not punished, nor the good rewarded. Success was given to the strong, failure thrust upon the weak. That was all. Besides, had any stranger been prowling round the house, he would have been seen by the servants or the keepers. Had any footmarks been found in the flower beds, the gardeners would have reported it. Yes, it had been merely fancy. Sybil Vane's brother. Woo! Man, that spooked the poop out of me. STL? STL has tipped $6.90 and says, hey boss, sorry to interrupt, but wanted to give. Hey, thanks STL, I really appreciate it. And you did get a good spoopin'. Thank you. Also, I'm glad that it works. Thank you. He had sailed away in his ship to founder in some winter sea. From him, at any rate, he was safe. Why, the man did not know who he was, could not know who he was. The mask of youth had saved him. And yet, if it had been merely an illusion, how terrible it was to think that conscience could raise such fearful phantoms and give them visible form and make them move before one. What sort of life would his be if day and night shadows of his crime were to peer at him from silent corners, to mock him from secret places, to whisper in his ear as he sat at the feast, to wake him with icy fingers as he lay asleep? As the thought crept through his brain, he grew pale with terror, and the air seemed to him to have become suddenly colder. Oh! In what a wild hour of madness he had killed his friend! How ghastly the mere memory of the scene! He saw it all again. Each hideous detail came back to him with added horror. Out of the black cave of time, terrible and swathed in scarlet, rose the image of his sin. When Lord Henry came in at 6 o'clock, he found him crying as one whose heart will break. It was not till the third day that he ventured to go out. There was something in the clear pine-scented air of that winter morning that seemed to bring him back in his joyousness and his ardor for life. But it was not merely the physical conditions of the environment that had caused the change. His own nature had revolted against the excess of anguish that had sought to maim and mar the perfection of its calm. With subtle and finely wrought temperaments, it is always so. Their strong passions must either bruise or bend. They either slay the man or themselves die. Shallow sorrows and shallow loves live on. The loves and sorrows that are great are destroyed by their own plenitude. Besides, he had convinced himself that he had been the victim of a terror-stricken imagination, and looked back now on his fears with something of pity, and not a little of contempt. After breakfast he walked with the Duchess for an hour in the garden, and then drove across the park to join the shooting party. The crisp frost lay like salt upon the grass. The sky was an inverted cup of blue metal. A thin film of ice bordered the flat reed-grown lake. At the corner of the pine wood he caught sight of Sir Geoffrey Clouston, the Duchess's brother, jerking 2 spent cartridges out of his gun. He jumped from the cart, and having told the groom to take the mare home, made his way towards his guest through the withered bracken and rough undergrowth. "Have you had good sport, Geoffrey?" he asked. "Not very good, Dorian. I think most of the birds have gone to the open. I dare say it will be better after lunch when we get to new ground." Dorian strolled along by his side. The keen aromatic air, the brown and red lights that glimmered in the wood, the hoarse cries of the beaters ringing out from time to time, and the sharp snaps of the guns that followed fascinated him, and filled him with a sense of delightful freedom. He was dominated by the carelessness of happiness, by the high indifference of joy. Suddenly, from a lumpy tussock of old grass, some 20 yards in front of them, with black-tipped ears erect and long hinder limbs throwing it forward, started a hare. It bolted for a thicket of alders. Sir Geoffrey put his gun to his shoulder, but there was something in the animal's grace of movement that strangely charmed Dorian Gray, and he cried out at once, "Don't shoot it, Geoffrey! Let it live!" "What nonsense, Dorian!" laughed his companion, and as the hare bounded into the thicket he fired. There were 2 cries heard. The cry of a hare in pain, which is dreadful. The cry of a man in agony, which is worse. "Good heavens! I've hit a beater!" exclaimed Sir Geoffrey. "What an ass the man was to get in front of the guns! Stop shooting there!" he called at the top of his voice. "A man is hurt!" The head-keeper came up running with a stick in his hand. "Where, sir? Where is he?" shouted. At the same time the firing ceased along the line. "Here!" answered Sir Geoffrey angrily, hurrying towards the thicket. "Why on earth don't you keep your men back? Spoiled my shooting for the day." Dorian watched them as they plunged into the alder clump, brushing the lithe, swinging branches aside. In a few moments they emerged, dragging a body after them into the sunlight. He turned away in horror. It seemed to him that misfortune followed wherever he went. He heard Sir Geoffrey ask the man if the man was really dead, and the affirmative answer of the keeper. The wood seemed to him to have become suddenly alive with faces. There was the trampling of myriad feet and the low buzz of voices. A great copper-breasted pheasant came beating through the boughs overhead. After a few moments that were to him in his perturbed state like endless hours of pain, he felt a hand laid on his shoulder. He started and looked round. "Dorian," said Lord Henry, "I had better tell them that the shooting is stopped for today. It would not look well to go on." "I wish it were stopped forever, Harry," he answered bitterly. "The whole thing is hideous and cruel. Is the man—" He could not finish the sentence. "I'm afraid so," rejoined Lord Henry. "He got the whole charge of the shot in his chest. He must have died almost instantaneously. Come, let us go home." They walked side by side in the direction of the avenue for nearly 50 yards without speaking. Then Dorian looked at Lord Henry and said with a heavy sigh, "It is a bad omen, Harry." "A very bad omen! Oh, Harry, this is all about me! This man's death is all about me!" "What is?" asked Lord Henry. "Oh, this accident, I suppose." "My dear fellow, it can't be helped. It was the man's own fault. Why did he get in front of the guns? Besides, it's nothing to us. It is rather awkward for Geoffrey, of course. It is not due to pepper beaters. It makes people think that one is a wild shot. And Geoffrey is not. He shoots very straight. But there is no use talking about the matter." Dorian shook his head. It is a bad omen, Harry. I feel as if something horrible were going to happen to some of us. To myself, perhaps," he added, passing his hand over his eyes with a gesture of pain. The elder man laughed. "The only horrible thing in the world is ennui, Dorian." "Ennui? Ennui?" "That is the one sin for which there is no forgiveness. But we are not likely to suffer from it unless these fellows keep chattering about this thing at dinner. I must tell them that the subject is to be tabooed. As for omens, there is no such thing as an omen. Destiny does not send us heralds. She's too wise or too cruel for that. Besides, what on earth would happen to you, Dorian? You have everything in the world that a man can want. There is no one who would not be delighted to change places with you." "There is no one with whom I would not change places, Harry. Don't laugh like that. I'm telling you the truth. The wretched peasant who has just died is better off than I am. I have no terror of death. It is the coming of death that terrifies me. Its monstrous wings seem to wheel in the leaden air around me. Good heavens, don't you see a man moving behind the trees there, watching me, waiting for me?" Lord Henry looked in the direction in which the trembling gloved hand was pointing. "Yes," he said, smiling, "I see the gardener waiting for you. I suppose he wants to ask what flowers you wish to have on the table tonight. How absurdly nervous you are, my dear fellow. You must come and see my doctor when we get back to town." Dorian heaved a sigh of relief as he saw the gardener approaching. The man touched his hat, glanced for a moment at Lord Henry in a hesitating manner, and then produced a letter, which he handed to his master. "Her Grace told me to wait for an answer," he murmured. Dorian put the letter into his pocket. "Tell her Grace that I am coming in," he said coldly. The man turned round and went rapidly in the direction of the house. "How fond women are of doing dangerous things!" laughed Lord Henry. "It is one of the qualities in them that I admire most. A woman will flirt with almost anybody in the world as long as other people are looking on." "How fond you are of saying dangerous things, Harry! In the present instance you are quite astray. I like the Duchess very much, but I don't love her. And the Duchess loves you very much, but she likes you less, so you are excellently matched." "You're talking scandal, Harry, and there is never any basis for scandal." "The basis of every scandal is an immoral certainty," said Lord Henry, lighting a cigarette. "You would sacrifice anybody, Harry, for the sake of an epigram." "The world goes to the altar of its own accord," was the answer. Apologize. I have to be careful for a second. I've got something in my eye. I'll be right back. Sorry about this. Sorry about that. I had a thread in my eye. Anyways, continuing from where we left off. I wish I could love, cried Dorian Gray, with a deep note of pathos in his voice. But I seem to have lost the passion and forgotten the desire. I'm too much concentrated on myself. My own personality has become a burden to me. I want to escape, to get away, to forget. It was silly of me to come down here at all. I think I shall send a wire to Harvey and to have the yacht got ready. On a yacht, one is safe. Safe from what, Dorian? You are in some trouble. Why not tell me what it is? I know I would help you. I can't tell you, Harry, he answered sadly, and I dare say it is only a fancy of mine. This unfortunate accident has upset me. I have a horrible presentiment that something of the kind may happen to me. What nonsense! I hope it is, but I can't help feeling it. Ah, here's the Duchess, looking like Artemis in a tailor-made gown. You see we have come back, Duchess. I've heard all about it, Mr. Gray. Poor Geoffrey is terribly upset, and it seems that you asked him not to shoot the hare. How curious! Yes, it was very curious. I don't know what made me say it. Some whim, I suppose. It looked the loveliest of little live things. But I am sorry they told you about the man. It is a hideous subject. It is an annoying subject, broke in Lord Henry. It has no psychological value at all. Now, if Geoffrey had done the thing on purpose, how interesting he would be! I should like to know someone who had committed a real murder. How horrid of you, Harry, cried the Duchess. Isn't it, Mr. Gray? Harry, Mr. Gray's ill again. He's going to faint. Dorian drew himself up with an effort and smiled. It's nothing, Duchess, he murmured. My nerves are dreadfully out of order, that is all. I'm afraid I walked too far this morning. I didn't hear what Harry said. Was it very bad? You must tell me some other time. I think I must go and lie down. You will excuse me, won't you? They had reached the great flight of steps that led from the conservatory on to the terrace. As the glass door closed behind Dorian, Lord Henry turned and looked at the Duchess with his slumberous eyes. Are you very much in love with him? He asked. She did not answer for some time, but stood gazing at the landscape. I wish I knew, she said at last. He shook his head. Knowledge would be fatal. It is the uncertainty that charms one. A mist makes things wonderful. One may lose one's way. All ways end up at the same point, my dear Gladys. What is that? Disillusion. Hey, thank you for following, Hurdy-Gurdy. It was my debut in life, she sighed. It came to you crowned. I'm tired of strawberry leaves. They become you. Only in public. You would miss them, said Lord Henry. I'll not part with the petal. Monmouth has ears. Old age is dull of hearing. Has he never been jealous? I wish he had been. He glanced about as if in search of something. What are you looking for? She inquired. The button from your foil, he answered. You must have dropped it. She laughed. I still have the mask. It makes your eyes lovelier, was his reply. She laughed again. Her teeth showed like white seeds in a scarlet fruit. Upstairs in his own room, Dorian Gray was lying on a sofa, with terror in every tingling fibre of his body. Life had suddenly become too hideous a burden for him to bear. The dreadful death of the unlucky beater, shot in the thicket like a wild animal, had seemed to him to prefigure death for himself also. He had nearly swooned at what Lord Henry had said in a chance mood of cynical jesting. At 5 o'clock he rang his bell for his servant and gave him orders to pack his things for the night express to town, and to have the brougham at the door by 8:30. He was determined not to sleep another night at Selby Royal. It was an ill-omened place. Death walked there in the sunlight. The grass of the forest had been spotted with blood. Then he wrote a note to Lord Henry, telling him that he was going up to town to consult his doctor, and asking him to entertain his guests in his absence. As he was putting it into the envelope, a knock came to the door, and his valet informed him that the head-keeper wished to see him. He frowned and bit his lip. "Send him in," he muttered, after some moments' hesitation. As soon as the man entered, Dorian pulled his cheque-book out of a drawer and spread it out before him. "I suppose you've come about the unfortunate accident of this morning, Thornton?" he said, taking up a pen. "Yes, sir," said the gamekeeper. "Was the poor fellow married? Had he any people dependent on him?" asked Dorian, looking bored. "If so, I should not like them to be left in want, and will send them any sum of money if you may think it necessary." "We don't know who he is, sir. That is what I took the liberty of coming to you about." "Don't know who he is?" said Dorian listlessly. "What do you mean? Wasn't he one of your men?" No, sir, never saw him before. Seems like a sailor, sir. The pen dropped from Dorian Gray's hand as he felt as if his heart had suddenly stopped beating. A sailor? He cried out. Did you say a sailor? Yes, sir. He looks as if he had been some sort of sailor, tattooed on both arms and that kind of thing. Was there anything found on him? Said Dorian, leaning forward and looking at the man with startled eyes. Anything that would tell his name? Some money, sir. Not much. And a 6-shooter. There was no name of any kind. A decent-looking man, sir, but rough-like. A sort of sailor, we think. Dorian started to his feet. A terrible hope fluttered past him. He clutched at it madly. Where is the body? He exclaimed. Quick! I must see it at once! It is in an empty stable in the home farm, sir. The folk don't like to have that sort of thing in their houses. They say a corpse brings bad luck. The home farm? Go there at once and meet me. Tell one of the grooms to bring my horse round. No, never mind. I'll go to the stables myself. It will save time. In less than a quarter of an hour, Dorian Gray was galloping down the long avenue as hard as he could go. The trees seemed to sweep past him in spectral procession, and wild shadows to fling themselves across his path. Once the mare swerved at a white gate-post and nearly threw him. He lashed her across the neck with his crop. She cleft the dusky air like an arrow. The stones flew from her hoofs. At last he reached the home farm. 2 men were loitering in the yard. He leapt from the saddle and threw the reins to one of them. In the farthest stable a light was glimmering. Something seemed to tell him that the body was there, and he hurried to the door and put his hand upon the latch. There he paused for a moment, feeling that he was on the brink of a discovery that would either make or mar his life. Then he thrust the door open and entered. On a heap of sacking in the far corner was lying the dead body of a man dressed in a coarse shirt and a pair of blue trousers. A spotted handkerchief had been placed over the face. A coarse candle, stuck in a bottle, sputtered beside it. Dorian Gray shuddered. He felt that his could not be the hand to take the handkerchief away, and called out to one of the farm servants to come to him. "Take that thing off the face. I wish to see it," he said, clutching at the doorpost for support. When the farm servant had done so, he stepped forward. A cry of joy broke from his lips. The man who had been shot in the thicket was James Vane. He stood there for some minutes looking at the dead body. As he rode home, his eyes were full of tears, for he knew he was safe. I just want Dorian to die. Is that so much to ask? Oh, no worries, MJ. Also, Zach, that's very cute, and it's amazing that that worked. Sometimes I talk to Pumpkin about things like that, and it does work, yes. I think that she's intelligent. I think that she's part magic. A Grimalkine? I don't know. Maybe Dorian's gonna, like, do something to end his own life. The only thing he truly cares about is himself. And I don't even think that he likes himself very much. That's fair, Harvest. It's like, it's weird that the point that they seem to be making is that Dorian keeps, like, chancing into things that saved his life. Like, he chanced to be good for a moment while he was like, the hair! And that ended up saving him. I think it's really strange. Ooh. Looks like we're getting to the actual end of the book. We're getting to the interesting bits. There's only this chapter and the next chapter left. Who thinks that Dorian's gonna die, and who thinks that he's just gonna, like, live until the end of the book? Like, maybe he's just gonna live until the end of the book. I don't want that. I don't remember how it ends. I want him to die, like, a lot. Like, maybe that's the point of the book. I'm the murderer now. That's the horror. Dorian Gray has corrupted me because I'm sitting here wishing for him to die. The true horror of Dorian Gray is us! Lord Henry and Dorian are both to blame. You too, MJ. I'm sorry. Well, if anybody has any final words to say before we begin on the last 2 chapters of this book, the memorials to say. If not, I will have to begin. Thanks, MJ. That's it. Okay. Yeah, we're literally at the very end of the book. Oops. Ah! Jinx! Hey, Dawn! Thank you so much for the 1,500 bits! I appreciate that. I appreciate that as your contribution before we end the book. Alright. Then we shall begin. Chapter 19. Fair. Ah, that's fair, Age Sensei. That's fair. You can always check the archive channel because the VODs are there, along with all of our thoughts and discussions. All right, I'll give you a couple seconds to close all the tabs and make it quiet so that you don't get the spoilers. That's great. Cool. The archive channel is on the YouTube, in the YouTube link on the info tab. Bye, thanks for coming. Okay. Starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Chapter 19. There is no use your telling me that you are going to be good, cried Lord Henry, dipping his white fingers into a red copper bowl filled with rose water. You're quite perfect. Pray, don't change. What? Dorian Gray shook his head. No, Harry, I've done too many dreadful things in my life. I'm not going to do any more. I began my good actions yesterday. Where were you yesterday? In the country, Harry. I was staying at a little inn by myself. My dear boy, said Lord Henry, smiling, anybody can be good in the country. There are no temptations there. That's the reason why people who live out of town are so absolutely uncivilized. Civilization is not by any means an easy thing to attain to. There are only two ways by which man can reach it. One is by being cultured, the other by being corrupt. Country people have no opportunity of being either, so they stagnate. Culture and corruption, echoed Dorian. I have known something of both. It seems terrible to me now that they should ever be found together. For I have a new ideal, Harry. I am going to alter. I think I have altered. You have not yet told me what your good action was, or did you say you had done more than one? Asked his companion as he spilt into his plate a little crimson pyramid of seeded strawberries, and through a perforated shell-shaped spoon snowed white sugar upon them. I can tell you, Harry. It is not a story I could tell to anyone else. I spared somebody. It sounds vain, but you understand what I mean. She was quite beautiful, and wonderfully like Sybil Vane. I think it was that which first attracted me to her. You remember Sybil, don't you? How long ago that seems. Well, Hetty was not one of our own class, of course. She was simply a girl in a village. But I really loved her. I am quite sure that I loved her. All during this wonderful May that we have been having, I used to run down and see her 2 or 3 times a week. Yesterday she met me in a little orchard. The apple blossoms kept tumbling down on her hair, and she was laughing. We were to have gone away together this morning at dawn. Suddenly I determined to leave her, as flower-like as I had found her. I should think the novelty of the emotion must have given you a thrill of real pleasure, Dorian, interrupted Lord Henry, but I can finish your idyll for you. You gave her good advice and broke her heart. That was the beginning of your reformation. Harry, you are horrible! You mustn't say these dreadful things. Hetty's heart is not broken. Of course she cried and all that, but there's no disgrace upon her. She can live, like Perdita, in her garden of mint and marigold. And weep over a faithless Florizel, said Lord Henry, laughing as he leant back in his chair. My dear Dorian, you have the most curiously boyish moods. Do you think this girl will ever really be contented now with anyone of her own rank? I suppose she'll be married some day to a rough carter or a grinning ploughman. Well, the fact of having meant you and loved you will teach her to despise her husband, and she will be wretched. From a moral point of view, I cannot say that I think much of your great renunciation. Even as a beginning, it's poor. Besides, how do you know that Hetty isn't floating at the present moment in some starlit mill pond with lovely water lilies round her like Ophelia? I can't bear this, Harry! You mock me at everything and then suggest the most serious tragedies! I'm sorry I told you now. I don't care what you say to me. I know I was right in acting as I did. Poor Hetty. As I rode past the farm this morning, I saw her white face at the window, like a spray of jasmine. Don't let us talk about it any more, and don't try to persuade me that the first good action I've done for years, the first little bit of self-sacrifice I have ever known, is really a sort of sin. I want to be better. I'm going to be better. Tell me something about yourself. What is going on in town? I've not been to the club for days. The people are still discussing poor Basil's disappearance. I should have thought they had got tired of that by this time, said Dorian, pouring himself out some wine and frowning slightly. My dear boy, they've only been talking about it for 6 weeks, and the British public are really not equal to the mental strain of having more than one topic every 3 months. They've been very fortunate lately, however. They have had my own divorce case, and Alan Campbell's suicide. Now they have got the mysterious disappearance of an artist. Scotland Yard still insists that the man in the grey ulster who left for Paris by the midnight train on the 9th of November was poor Basil. And the French police declare that Basil never arrived in Paris at all. I suppose in about a fortnight we shall be told that he has been seen in San Francisco. It's an odd thing, but everyone who disappears is said to be seen at San Francisco. It must be a delightful city, and possess all the attractions of the next world. What do you think has happened to Basil? Asked Dorian, holding up his burgundy against the light and wondering how it was that he could discuss the matter so calmly. I have not the slightest idea. If Basil chooses to hide himself, it is no business of mine. If he is dead, I don't want to think about him. Death is the only thing that ever terrifies me. I hate it. Why? Said the younger man wearily. Because, said Lord Henry, passing beneath his nostrils the gilt trellis of an open vinaigrette box, one can survive everything nowadays except that. Death and vulgarity are the only 2 facts in the 19th century that one cannot explain away. Let us have our coffee in the music room, Dorian. You must play Chopin to me. The man with whom my wife ran away played Chopin exquisitely. Oh, poor Victoria. I was very fond of her. The house is rather lonely without her. Of course, married life is merely a habit, a bad habit. But then one regrets the loss even of one's worst habits. Perhaps one regrets them the most. They are such an essential part of one's personality. Dorian said nothing, but rose to the table and, passing into the next room, sat down to the piano and let his fingers stray across the white and black ivory of the keys. After the coffee had been brought in, he stopped, and, looking over at Lord Henry, said, Harry, did it ever occur to you that Basil was murdered? Lord Henry yawned. Basil was very popular and always wore a Waterbury watch. Why should he have been murdered? He was not clever enough to have enemies. Of course, he had a wonderful genius for painting, but a man can paint like Velasquez and yet be as dull as possible. Basil was really rather dull. He only interested me once, and that was when he told me years ago that he had a wild adoration for you, and that you were the dominant motive of his art. I was very fond of Basil, said Dorian, with a note of sadness in his voice. But don't people say that he was murdered? Oh, some of the papers do. It does not seem to me to be at all probable. I know there are dreadful places in Paris, but Basil was not the sort of man to have gone to them. He had no curiosity. It was his chief defect. What would you say, Harry, if I told you that I had murdered Basil? Said the younger man. He watched him intently after he had spoken. I would say, my dear fellow, that you are posing for a character that doesn't suit you. All crime is vulgar, just as all vulgarity is crime. It's not in you, Dorian, to commit a murder. I'm sorry if I hurt your vanity by saying so, but I assure you it is true. Crime belongs exclusively to the lower orders. I don't blame them in the smallest degree. I should fancy that crime was to them what art is to us, simply a method of procuring extraordinary sensations. A method of procuring sensations. Do you think, then, that a man who has once committed a murder could possibly do the same crime again? Don't tell me that. Oh, anything becomes a pleasure if one does it too often, cried Lord Henry, laughing. That is one of the most important secrets of life. I should fancy, however, that murder is always a mistake. One should never do anything that one cannot talk about after dinner. But let us pass from poor Basil. I wish I could believe that he had come to such a really romantic end as you suggest, but I can't. I dare say he fell into the Seine off an omnibus, and that the conductor hushed up the scandal. Yes, I should fancy that was his end. I see him lying now on his back under those dull green waters with the heavy barges floating over him, and long weeds catching in his hair. Do you know, I don't think he would have done much more good work. During the last 10 years his painting had gone off very much. Dorian heaved a sigh, and Lord Henry strolled across the room and began to stroke the head of a curious Java parrot, a large gray-plumaged bird with pink crest and tail that was balancing itself upon a bamboo perch. As his pointed fingers touched it, it dropped the white scurf of crinkled lids over black glass-like eyes and began to sway backwards and forwards. Yes, he continued, turning round and taking his handkerchief out of his pocket. His painting had gone quite off. It seemed to me to have lost something. It had lost an ideal. When you and he ceased to be great friends, he ceased to be a great artist. What was it separated you? I suppose he bored you? If so, he never forgave you. It's a habit bores have. By the way, what has become of that wonderful portrait he did of you? I don't think I've ever seen it since he finished it. Oh, I remember your telling me years ago that you had sent it down to Selby and that it had got mislaid or stolen on the way. You never got it back? What a pity. It was really a masterpiece. I remember I wanted to buy it. I wish I had now. It belonged to Basil's best period. Since then his work was that curious mixture of bad painting and good intentions that always entitles a man to be called a representative British artist. Did you advertise for it? You should. I forget, said Dorian. I suppose I did, but I never really liked it. I'm sorry I sat for it. The memory of the thing is hateful to me. Why do you talk of it? It used to remind me of those curious lines in some play. Hamlet, I think. How do they run? Like the painting of a sorrow, a face without a heart. Yes, that is what it was like. Lord Henry laughed. If a man treats life artistically, his brain is his heart, he answered, sinking into an armchair. Dorian Gray shook his head and struck some soft chords on the piano. Like the painting of a sorrow, he repeated, a face without a heart. The elder man lay back and looked at him with half-closed eyes. By the way, Dorian, he said after a pause, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose, how does the quotation run, his own soul? The music jarred, and Dorian Gray started and stared at his friend. Why do you ask me that, Harry? My dear fellow, said Lord Henry, elevating his eyebrows in surprise, I asked you because I thought you might be able to give me an answer. That is all. I was going through the park last Sunday, and close by the Marble Arch there stood a little crowd of shabby-looking people, listening to some vulgar street preacher. As I passed by, I heard the man yelling out that question to his audience. It struck me as being rather dramatic. London is very rich in curious effects of that kind. A wet Sunday, an uncouth Christian in a mackintosh, a ring of sickly white faces under a broken roof of dripping umbrellas, and a wonderful phrase flung into the air by shrill, hysterical lips. It was really very good in its way, quite a suggestion. I thought of telling the prophet that art had a soul, but that man had not. I'm afraid, however, he would not have understood me. Don't, Harry. The soul is a terrible reality. It can be bought and sold and bartered away. It can be poisoned or made perfect. There's a soul in each of us. I know it. Do you feel quite sure of that, Dorian? Quite sure. Ah, then it must be an illusion. The things one feels absolutely certain about are never true. That is the fatality of faith and the lesson of romance. How grave you are. Don't be so serious. What have you or I to do with the superstitions of our age? No, we have given up our belief in the soul. Play me something. Play me a nocturne, Dorian, and as you play, tell me, in a low voice, how you have kept your youth. You must have some secret. I'm only 10 years older than you are, and I am wrinkled and worn and yellow. You are really wonderful, Dorian. You have never looked more charming than you do tonight. You remind me of the day I saw you first. You were rather cheeky, very shy, and absolutely extraordinary. You've changed, of course, but not in appearance. I wish you would tell me your secret. To get back my youth, I would do anything in the world, except take exercise, get up early, or be respectful. Youth! There is nothing like it. It is absurd to talk of the ignorance of youth. The only people to whose opinions I listen now with any respect are people much younger than myself. They seem in front of me. Life has revealed to them her latest wonder. As for the aged, I always contradict the aged. I do it on principle. If you ask them their opinion on something that happened yesterday, they solemnly give you the opinion current in 1820, when people wore high stocks and believed in everything and knew absolutely nothing. How lovely that thing you're playing is! I wonder, did Chopin write it at Majorca, with the sea sweeping round the villa and the salt spray dashing against the panes? It's marvelously romantic. What a blessing it is that there is one art left to us that is not imitative. Don't stop. I want music tonight. It seems to me that you are the young Apollo, and that I am Marsyas, listening to you. I have sorrows, Dorian, of my own that even you know nothing of. The tragedy of old age is not that one is old, that one is young. I'm amazed sometimes at my own sincerity. Ah, Dorian, how happy you are! What an exquisite life you have had! You have drunk deeply of everything. You have crushed the grapes against your palate. Nothing has been hidden from you. And it has all been to you no more than the sound of music. It has not marred you. You're still the same. I'm not the same, Harry. Yes, you are the same! I wonder what the rest of your life will be. Don't spoil it by renunciations. At present you are a perfect type. Don't make yourself incomplete. You are quite flawless now. You need not shake your head. You know you are. Besides, Dorian, don't deceive yourself. Life is not governed by will or intention. Life is a question of nerves and fibers and slowly built up cells in which thought hides itself and passion has its dreams. You may fancy yourself safe and think yourself strong, but a chance tone of color in a room or a morning sky, a particular perfume that you had once loved and that brings subtle memories with it, a line from a forgotten poem that you had come across again, a cadence from a piece of music that you had ceased to play. I tell you, Dorian, that it is on things like these that our lives depend. Browning writes about that somewhere, but our own senses will imagine them for us. There are moments when the odor of Lila Blanc passes suddenly across me, and I have to live the strangest month of my life over again. I wish I could change places with you, Dorian. The world has cried out against us both, but it has always worshipped you. It always will worship you. You are the type of what the age is searching for, and what it is afraid it has found. I'm so glad that you have never done anything, never carved a statue or painted a picture or produced anything outside of yourself. Life has been your art. You have set yourself to music. Your days are your sonnets. Dorian rose up from the piano and passed his hand through his hair. Yes, life has been exquisite, he murmured, but I am not going to have the same life, Harry. And you must not say these extravagant things to me. You don't know everything about me. I think that if you did, even you would turn from me. You laugh. Don't laugh. Why have you stopped playing, Dorian? Go back and give me the nocturne over again. Look at that great honey-colored moon that hangs in the dusky air. She's waiting for you to charm her, and if you play, she will come closer to the earth. You won't? Let us go to the club, then. It has been a charming evening, and we must end it charmingly. There is someone at White's who wants it immensely to know you, young Lord Poole, Bournemouth's eldest son. He's already copied your neckties and has begged me to introduce you to him. He's quite delightful, and rather reminds me of you. I hope not, said Dorian with a sad look in his eyes. But I am tired tonight, Harry. I shan't go to the club. It is nearly 11, and I want to go to bed early. Do stay. You've never played so well as tonight. There was something in your touch that was wonderful. It had more expression than I had ever heard from it before. It is because I am going to be good, he answered, smiling. I'm a little changed already. You cannot change to me, Dorian, said Lord Henry. You and I will always be friends. Yet you poisoned me with a book once. I should not forgive that. Harry, promise me that you will never lend that book to anyone. It does harm. My dear boy, you are really beginning to moralize. You will soon be going about like the converted and the revivalist, warning people against all the sins of which you have grown tired. You're much too delightful to do that. Besides, it's no use. You and I are what we are, and will be what we will be. As for being poisoned by a book, there's no such thing as that. Art has no influence upon action. It annihilates the desire to act. It is superbly sterile. The books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame. That's all. But we won't discuss literature. Come round tomorrow. I'm going to ride at 11. We might go together, and I will take you to lunch afterwards with Lady Branksome. She's a charming woman, and wants to consult you about some tapestry she's thinking of buying. Mind you come. Or shall we lunch with our little Duchess? She says she never sees you now. Perhaps you are tired of Gladys? I thought you would be. Her clever tongue gets on one's nerves. Well, in any case, be here at 11. Must I really come, Harry? Certainly! The park is quite lovely now. I don't think there have been such lilacs since the year I met you. Very well, I shall be there at 11, said Dorian. Good night, Harry. As he reached the door, He hesitated for a moment, as if he had something more to say. Then he sighed and went out. Curious. Cheers, Yellow Ring. Curious. I just want him to have some kind of comeuppance, but now he's just saying that he's gonna be good? I don't believe it for a second. Man. I don't want this to be a story about a guy who does really bad things to people, then just gets away with it because he's pretty and rich. I mean, it wouldn't be all that different from, like, stuff that happens in real life, but come on. What say you? Shall we continue on with the final chapter? Chapter 20. It's about time. It's only been, like, what, 20 years for him? All right. Why do you think he's being good? Because he's sad about Basil, or he doesn't want people to find out about him? Ah. Oh, you think he's, like, worried about how paranoid he was getting, how insane he was going? Oh, hi, Shane. I didn't even notice that that was you. Lol. He has already lost himself, that's true. He certainly seems scared of something. It's not like he's suddenly decided to be good. And that's obvious from the fact of, like, what he thinks being good is. He thinks being good is now, like, not completing the seduction that he had done of this poor girl. To try and curb the paranoia. I'm very curious about how this will end then. I must be an... Yeah, he's like, I did a good thing for the first time in my life and it was truly good. And it's like, did you though? Did you? I hope that if he does end up dying in this chapter, I hope it's in, like, a spectacular way. Like, I hope, like, hell unearths beneath him and swallows him up, because that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this book so far. All right. Chapter 20. The most poetic way is for him to die and be forgotten. Hey. With no mark. And Harvest would like suicide zombie. I mean, not suicide zombie, sorry. Zombie from the lady who committed suicide. I don't know. I think it would be good. I don't know. I don't know what I think would be a good enough comeuppance for this character. I would want his shames to be revealed to the whole of the world. And him to be, like, reviled. Because that's the thing that he fears, is people finding out how bad he is. He's not, like, afraid of death or anything. He's just afraid that people are going to know that he's bad. So I hope people find out that he's bad. That seems like it would be the... And, like, they want nothing to do with him. That's, like, his worst fear as far as I can tell. Okay, so chapter 20. It was a lovely night, so warm that he threw his coat over his arm and did not even put his silk scarf round his throat. As he strolled home, smoking a cigarette, 2 young men in evening dress passed him. He heard one of them whisper to the other, "That's Dorian Gray." He remembered how pleased he used to be when he was pointed out, or stared at, or talked about. He was tired of hearing his own name now. Half the charm of the little village, where he had been so often lately, was that no one knew who he was. He had often told the girl whom he had lured to love him that he was poor, and she had believed him. He had told her once that he was wicked, and she had laughed at him, and answered that wicked people were always very old and very ugly. What a laugh she had, just like a thrush singing, and how pretty she had been in her cotton dresses and her large hats. She knew nothing, but she had everything that he had lost. When he reached home, he found his servant waiting up for him. He sent him to bed and threw himself down on the sofa in the library and began to think over some of the things that Lord Henry had said to him. Was it really true that one could never change? He felt a wild longing for the unstained purity of his boyhood, his rose-white boyhood, as Lord Henry had once called it. He knew that he had tarnished himself, filled his mind with corruption, and given horror to his fancy, that he had been an evil influence to others, and had experienced a terrible joy in being so, and that, of the lives that had crossed his own, it had been the fairest and the most full of promise that he had brought to shame. But was it all irretrievable? Was there no hope for him? Ah, in what a monstrous moment of pride and passion he had prayed that the portrait should bear the burden of his days, and he keep the unsullied splendor of eternal youth! All his failure had been due to that. Better for him that each sin of his life had brought its sure, swift penalty along with it. There's purification in punishment. Not "forgive us our sins," but "smite us for our iniquities," should be the prayer of a man to a most just God. The curiously carved mirror that Lord Henry had given to him so many years ago now was standing on the table, and the white-limbed cupids laughed round it as of old. He took it up as he had done on that night of horror, when he had first noted the change in the fatal picture, and with wild, tear-dimmed eyes looked into its polished shield. Once, someone who had terribly loved him had written to him a mad letter, ending with these idolatrous words: "The world is changed because you are made of ivory and gold. The curves of your lips rewrite history." The phrases came back to his memory, and he repeated them over and over to himself. Then he loathed his own beauty, and flinging the mirror on the floor, crushed it into silver splinters beneath his heel. It was his beauty that had ruined him, his beauty and the youth that he had prayed for. But for those two things his life might have been free from stain. His beauty had been to him but a mask, his youth but a mockery. What was youth at best? A green, an unripe time, a time of shallow moods and sickly thoughts. Why had he worn its livery? Youth had spoiled him. It was better not to think of the past. Nothing could alter that. It was of himself and of his own future that he had to think. James Vane was hidden in a nameless grave in Selby churchyard. Alan Campbell had shot himself one night in his laboratory, but had not revealed the secret that he had been forced to know. The excitement, such as it was, over Basil Hallward's disappearance would soon pass away. It was already waning. He was perfectly safe there. Nor, indeed, was it the death of Basil Hallward that weighed most upon his mind. It was the living death of his own soul that troubled him. Basil had painted the portrait that had marred his life. He could not forgive him that. It was the portrait that had done everything. Basil had said things to him that were unbearable, and that he had yet borne with patience. The murder had been simply the madness of a moment. As for Alan Campbell, his suicide had been his own act. He had chosen to do it. It was nothing to him. A new life! That was what he wanted. That was what he was waiting for. Surely he had begun it already. He had spared one innocent thing, at any rate. He would never again tempt innocence. He would be good. As he thought of Hetty Merton, he began to wonder if the portrait in the locked room had changed. Surely it was not still so horrible as it had been. Perhaps if his life became pure, he would be able to expel every sign of evil passion from the face. Perhaps the signs of evil had already gone away. He would go and look. He took the lamp from the table and crept upstairs. As he unbarred the door, a smile of joy flitted across his strangely young-looking face, and lingered for a moment about his lips. Yes, he would be good, and the hideous thing that he had hidden away would no longer be a terror to him. He felt as if the load had been lifted from him already. He went in quietly, locking the door behind him, as was his custom, and dragged the purple hanging from the portrait. A cry of pain and indignation broke from him. He could see no change, save that in the eyes there was a look of cunning, and in the mouth the curved wrinkle of the hypocrite. The thing was still loathsome, more loathsome if possible than before, and the scarlet dew that spotted the hand seemed brighter and more like blood newly spilt. Then he trembled. Had it been merely vanity that had made him do his one good deed? Or the desire for a new sensation, as Lord Henry had hinted, with his mocking laugh? Or that passion to act a part that sometimes makes us do things finer than we are ourselves? Or perhaps all these? And why was the red stain larger than it had been? It seemed to have crept like a horrible disease over the wrinkled fingers. There was blood on the painted feet, as though the thing had dripped. Blood even on the hand that had not held the knife. Confess? Did it mean that he was to confess? To give himself up and be put to death? He laughed. He felt that the idea was monstrous. Besides, even if he did confess, who would believe him? There was no trace of the murdered man anywhere. Everything belonging to him had been destroyed. He himself had been burned, what had been below stairs. The world would simply say that he was mad. They would shut him up if he persisted in his story. Yet it was his duty to confess, to suffer public shame, to make public atonement. There was a God who called upon men to tell their sins to earth as well as to heaven. Nothing that he could do would cleanse him till he had told his own sin. His sin? He shrugged his shoulders. The death of Basil Hallward seemed very little to him. He was thinking of Hetty Merton, for it was an unjust mirror, this mirror of his soul, that he was looking at. Vanity, curiosity, hypocrisy. Had there been nothing more in his renunciation than that? There had been something more. At least he thought so. But who could tell? No, there had been nothing more. Though vanity had spared her. Through vanity he had spared her. In hypocrisy he had worn the mask of goodness. For curiosity's sake he had tried the denial of self. He recognized that now. But this murder, was it to dog him all his life? Was he always to be burdened by his past? Was he really to confess? Never. There was only one bit of evidence left against him. The picture itself. That was evidence. He would destroy it. Why had he kept it so long? Once it had given him pleasure to watch it changing and growing old. Of late he had felt no such pleasure. It had kept him awake at night. When he had been away, he had been filled with terror lest other eyes should look upon it. It had brought melancholy across his passions. Its mere memory had marred many moments of joy. It had been like conscience to him. Yes, it had been conscience. He would destroy it. He looked round and saw the knife that had stabbed Basil Hallward. He had cleaned it many times, till there was no stain left upon it. It was bright and glistened. As it had killed the painter, so it would kill the painter's work. And all that that meant. It would kill the past, and when that was dead, he would be free. It would kill this monstrous soul life, and, without its hideous warnings, he would be at peace. He seized the thing and stabbed the picture with it. There was a cry heard, and a crash. The cry was so horrible in its agony that the frightened servants woke and crept out of their rooms. 2 gentlemen who were passing in the square below stopped and looked up at the great house. They walked on till they met a policeman and brought him back. The man rang the bell several times, but there was no answer. Except for a light in one of the top windows, the house was all dark. After a time he went away and stood in an adjoining portico and watched. "Whose house is that, constable?" asked the elder of the 2 gentlemen. "Mr. Dorian Gray's, sir," answered the policeman. They looked at each other as they walked away and sneered. One of them was Sir Henry Ashton's uncle. Inside, in the servants' part of the house, the half-clad domestics were talking in low whispers to each other. Old Mrs. Leaf was crying and wringing her hands. Francis was as pale as death. After about a quarter of an hour, he got the coachman and one of the footmen and crept upstairs. They knocked, but there was no reply. They called out. Everything was still. Finally, after vainly trying to force the door, they got on the roof and dropped down to the balcony. The windows yielded easily. Their bolts were old. When they entered, they found, hanging upon the wall, a splendid portrait of their master, as they had last seen him, in all the wonder of his exquisite youth and beauty. Lying on the floor was a dead man, in evening dress, with a knife in his heart. He was withered, wrinkled, and loathsome of visage. It was not till they had examined the rings that they recognized who it was. The end! Huh. Well, how do we feel about that? Huh. That makes sense. A little bit anticlimactic. I wanted him to get like I wanted a climax, and instead a fitting end. It's not an unfitting end. It's not an unfitting end. Huh, I don't know. Him destroying his own phylactery Poetic in a way, his last act was to slay his own soul, done out of his selfish desire. I mean, I guess that's true. That is pretty poetic. His last act, born of more vanity, born of even more vanity, his last act was to accidentally kill himself and to destroy his own soul. As he had been doing. It's just very, I don't know. I wanted him, I don't know. Whoops. What's everybody's take on this book? Like, how do we feel about this book? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Did you like the themes? I mean, it definitely, people fearing to become irrelevant and that making them completely void of relevance. That's what the book is about for you? Relevance. Oh, I guess that makes sense because Dorian feared age making him irrelevant. I don't know. I don't know what I would say that the central theme is about. I think that the central theme is about like the ways that corruption can happen in societies and the ways that it's perpetuated by societies, kind of through privilege, like just through the privilege of beauty, which is not a privilege people talk about very much, but it's definitely something that exists. Dorian was just, and they were so intent on believing that good people look beautiful and bad people are ugly. It was okay, not bad, but not your favorite. That makes sense to me. Interesting. Similarities to your own characters, but yeah, I don't know. Is it a fair end? Not a fair ending for those whose lives he ruined. Yeah, but it rarely ever is a fair end for that, am I right? He wants to be it. I don't know. I mean, if it's people fearing relevance and irrelevance, I don't think that he's fearing irrelevance at the hands of others. I think he's fearing, like, existential irrelevance. I mean, look at Lord Henry. Lord Henry's, like, the worst character. I mean, I know Dorian murdered somebody, but I hate Lord Henry. Lord Henry's crime is just that he chooses not to live or engage with life ever at any point. He doesn't even really seem to care about Dorian in chapter 19. I feel like that was the point of chapter 19, of him just being like, oh, play me a song, Dorian. He doesn't even care about Dorian. Dorian's out here, like, losing his mind, and he's like, I wish you would tell me. It's so interesting. Blah, blah, blah. I hope Basil was murdered. That would be great. That's awesome, MJ. Well, Dorian's dead. An exciting death might have been too good for him. Oh, that's... Well, but to be fair, is this not a very exciting death? It's gonna be a big hubbub in the town. Like, wow, this beautiful portrait, and was he killed? Was he murdered? Was that dead body him? Like, they're definitely gonna make it the talk of the town. Like, you can't just, like, be like, look at this disfigured body. Who has the rings of Dorian on him? Like, people are definitely gonna talk about that. Lord Henry talks too much. Lord Henry talks about things that aren't important. Like, Lord Henry just shelters himself from his own feelings about everything. If he treats all of life as a game, then nothing hurts. If he laughs about how his wife left him, then it doesn't hurt him, how lonely he is and how sad he is. He even tells Dorian in chapter 19, there are pains that I don't even tell you. So this dumb guy who pretends like he's above everything and, like, knows the best of everything is just as lost as everybody else. I don't know. I feel like in chapter 19, Dorian really gets to see how wrong Lord Henry is. 6 layers of irony. The dangers of never taking life seriously. I don't know. It's hard for me to, like, really say what the point is of this book, I guess. Yeah, I mean, he admits as much at the end with his thoughts. He's like, why did I do this? Was it truly all for vanity? I don't think it was, and such things. I don't know. I don't know. I can't say that I love the concept of the book, and I love the themes that Oscar Wilde was getting at, and I think he makes a lot of really good points. I just think he kind of makes those good points, like, halfway through the story. And then the rest of the story, I don't know. The end of the story, I'm not sure that the end of the story really tells us anything new about the themes that he's talking about. I don't know what the latter half of the book was about. I'm trying to like think about whether there was aside from that, like Dorian's vanity and like he ends up destroying himself ultimately is what happens in the end of the book. It seemed like the part that maybe Oscar Wilde really wanted to write was the beginning of the book because that's where all the meat was. And then back in the day you had to release stories where bad things happened to bad people. That's a big assumption though on my part. I hit it well, it just had to be a book or something? Well, there's lots of things to like about the book. It's definitely not among the worst books that I've read. Like, it's definitely in the, like, okay to pleasant. Like, if this were a 10-star system, I've got, like, a pumpkin hair in my mouth. If this were a 10-star system, I'd give it, like a 6. Like a 5 or a 6. Yeah. It's way too long. I see why they had abridged versions. Oh, yeah, like The Importance of Being Earnest. I love that play. Chaos, corruption, poisoning the mind. And like how cynicism and irony and skepticism and all that is bad because like Lord Henry just has a bad influence on everybody that he touches. And also about like the idleness of the upper class and like their effects, like how they treat people as playthings because their lives are so vapid and void of meaning that everybody is a plaything to them and they can just dismiss concerns about other people by being like, oh, I'm sure they loved it. Like, these people have no empathy. They're all so disconnected from their own humanity and like choosing to be so as though it's a more civilized way of being. I mean, I definitely think that Oscar Wilde wrote this as a criticism of, oh, let me put on the music now. But I definitely think that Oscar Wilde wrote this as a criticism of, you know, the people he was associated with 100% of the time. 3 out of 5 in the middle. Yeah, about the same, Just kind of somewhere in there. Just somewhere in there, yeah. Huh. Well, I guess if nobody has anything else to add about the book. Yeah, like I'm saying, this might actually be one of the only cases that I've ever like read a book where I'm like, wow, the abridged version's probably better. It could have been done as a short story. There's just lots of like, you can feel it. Like I felt it when I was reading out loud. I was like, oh, look at these people with their pretty words and nothing in the plot is happening. Yeah, we never got like a full description of the portrait and what all exactly happened to it. Like we never got to hear about the wrinkles or like splotched skin from age or like I don't know what else would happen from age that would be badder. We just didn't get to hear much about it. I'm guessing because he wanted to leave it up to the imagination. Oh my god, yes, I mean that chapter. That hurt my throat so much to read all of that, Cirque. Oh, what was the deal with the wardrobe box goo? Maybe that was the opium? Hang on, I'm gonna Google. Opium in 1800s. Green? Oh, I guess it was green. Was it? Hang on. Reflected in the portrait. That's fair. Henry is terrible. I think that... I see what you mean about thinking that the book glorifies him. I think that Oscar Wilde's point was trying to be that, like, just because someone is, like, witty and clever and, like, fun to be around doesn't make them a good person. So Dorian gets all the flack for it, but Lord Henry is really the bad one. I don't know how well that was communicated, but I definitely picked up on that. We're reading Dorian glorifying him. That's fair. That's a fair... I think that's why we didn't get that much, like, input in the last chapter, because Dorian couldn't glorify him anymore because Lord Henry was just wrong. Oh, Harvest, that's cool. I think that's playing into our modern sensibilities, though. I think that, like, that's, like, more... I think culture was probably different back then. Culture? Horror. I think horror was a little different back then. If we remade a movie nowadays... Yeah, I think, like, presenting those paragraphs for Lord Henry that are just as disjointed, and we find out, like, all this bad stuff that's happened to him and his life, and he says that he's sad about it, and he seems, like, completely disinterested in Dorian. He's just gonna continue living his stupid, fruitless life, is the thing. Like, chapter 19 is really the end of the story to me, because it's just like, and Lord Henry keeps doing it. Like, this is just his life. It's empty and shallow and pointless. I'll have to give that a peek at some point, Plasticape. And then Lord Henry fell off of his horse and died in disgrace. And then he was abandoned in disgrace. Okay, well... Well, I guess it's time to wind down the stream now. I'm gonna be eating food and stuff, and my throat hurts, so I should rest it. Would everybody like to share one good thing that happened to them today and one good thing we're looking forward to tomorrow? What's for dinner? I got no idea. Who knows? That Zek just makes dinner, and I find out afterwards. My good thing for the day is that we finished the Picture of Dorian Gray. I have to say that this will probably be the last book club book for a little while, at least while I'm gunning for partner. And like the viewership counts matter a lot, and book club has never been a really highly visited thing. Although, thank you so much to all the lurkers and everybody who showed up, because it was really helpful inflating, you know, it was very helpful, and I appreciate it a lot that I got to finish out this book with you guys. To go get a haircut. Best of luck. I hope your hair looks incredible. Finished editing the finale of her Let's Play series. Oh, I hope it was really like, I hope it was emotional. Sometimes it gets emotional when you get there. Banana shirt. Like my banana shirt. Hey, Wolf Awake. Got to see a waterfall today. Tomorrow you have, oh, an apartment viewing. I love looking at apartments and houses. I don't know what it is. I just like the potential. Sharing the banana shirt? Oh yeah, we shared. We're sharing good things. Yes, MJ. Pumpkin spice flips. Yeah, I'm excited, Dawn. Like I said, I'm gonna check on Tuesday after I have my dentist appointment. I'm very excited. May have cried at several points in the series. Happy end. Oh, that's really cute. I'm glad you have a good time. I'm really excited to see. Dawn, do you want me to like open it up on stream, or would you rather me open it up off stream? I never know what's fun for people. Aw, that's nice. I'm glad you got to have dinner with your dad and that your dad invited you. That's really cute. Ooh. I smell garlic in the air. Garlic bread? Oh, it smells really good. I'm hungry. On stream is cool? Okay. Then we'll see if as long as I get it in time, which since my dentist appointment's earlier and I stream at 3, I'll have to check and make sure that I get it, but if not, then Thursday. Okay, let's see who we should raid. Oh. Well, this is kind of nostalgic. Okay, so there's a couple different people that we can raid. Although, I will say I haven't raided, I'm not sure when the last time I've raided this person was. But they're playing Illusion of Gaia, and I know that a lot of people really like Illusion of Gaia. Is that a thing that people would be interested in seeing? It's a larger streamer with a larger audience, but a friend. So every now and then I do like to raid friends. If not, have you? You know who I'm talking about. It's so freaking hard to decide who to raid anymore because there's just like a million friends and then a million small streamers who I believe in and want to support. And it's like, ha. We are done, little sushi roll. Was it good? Eh. Eh. That's how you felt about the book too. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Small. Okay, so you guys are voting for a smaller streamer. Alright, sorry Gerard. Maybe I can raid you some other time. Let me see. Okay, smaller streamer. I don't believe that I've ever raided this person before. Let me check. Let me see what this person is playing. I don't remember how I found this person. You were? Good, because I have followed so many new people that I have never raided before. Hey, Alexander, thank you for letting the Bit Pony ride. That was real kind of you. You stayed for most of it. That's sweet. Yeah, they're really cute. Okay, so as far as smaller streamers go, there's somebody playing Valorant, and like that's the main person that I haven't raided before. Otherwise, there are two somewhat larger streamers who I've never raided before. One doing Twitch Sings and one doing Kingdom Hearts Recoded. So, which one would you guys like to go with? Seriously, it's so hard. It's like, I don't know. It's like when you like give me a list of people and you're like, you can only do a kind thing for one of them. I'm like, this is an impossible decision. Please stop. Like, I find it so hard, personally, for me to do this. Alright, bye, little sister roll. It did. Thank you so much for looking. I really appreciate it. Hey! There it goes. There it goes. Thank you for the 100 bits, Not Merrick. Sleep well. Okay, at this point I'm just gonna roll a dice and I'm gonna pick based off of the dice roll. Let me get a dice out. A die. Let me get something out. It's so hard for me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm indecisive, but like I would like to do the nice thing for everybody, not just for some of the people. A d20. I'm rolling a d6 because there's 3 people. So 1 to 2 will be the smallest. 3 to 4 will be the medium, and 5 to 6 will be the largest. Okay, the largest streamer. 1! Okay, small streamer it is. Let's raid. The name is Diamondatrix. So let's see how that goes. A much smaller streamer, only about 9 or 10 people watching right now, so this should be exciting for them. Now, I have to say, I haven't actually vetted this person's content at all, so I'm hoping that they're a good person. So, let's be careful. Let's give them a good time and hopefully make them really excited. Let's do it. The channel's intended for mature audiences, so beware of swearing. Hey, thanks, Cirque. Alright. You're immature? Oh no, Music Macabre, you won't be able to join. Anyways, Thank you guys so much for coming, and I really appreciate you lurking to help me out. I guess next Sunday stream will just be a regular stream? Or maybe I'll move the day away from Sunday. I don't know. We'll have to figure it out as we go. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for coming, and I will see you again on Tuesday. Bye! Have a great rest of your night as well. Okay, rating in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.